Alrighty, sorry about the delay. Welcome back, excuse me, to another thrilling installment of Wordy Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and today we'll be reading more of To Walk the Night by William Sloane. Oh, thank you for tuning in, Fixiac. If for some reason, Fixiac, Twitch is not properly broadcasting, or vice versa, if YouTube is not properly broadcasting, feel free to switch to the other one. All of these that have been recorded are available on the YouTube channel. I update the playlists usually every month, so this weekend, hopefully. Anyway, previously on To Walk the Night. In the wake of the death of Dr. LeNormand, the mysterious death of Dr. LeNormand, Jerry Lister, Barclay's very good childhood friend and roommate, has invited LeNormand's wife to stay with them in New York. He also asks Bark to get an intro with Bark's mother. And so Barclay introduces her to Grace. They get along well because Grace is nothing if not adaptable. And gives her a bit of a makeover because apparently Selena does not know how to wear clothes, or does not know how to pick out clothes that accentuate her figure. One wonders why this might be. Anyway, Bark is kind of getting over his misgivings of Selena. There'll every now and again be something that, throws him about her, like things that she doesn't know that she should, reactions she has that are not what one would consider normal for the time. And so, but it's like, well, he wants, Jerry's clearly infatuated with her, and, he wants to be a good friend. So he wants to make sure Jerry's having a good time, and be as decent about the whole thing as he can. But then he receives a letter from one Alan Parsons, the lead detective on the Dr. LeNormand murder case, or mysterious death case, anyway, which says, "My dear Mr. Jones, no doubt you will be surprised to hear from me in this way, but as the matter is not strictly official, I prefer to write you. I want to ask a favor of you. Will it be possible for you to come down to Collegeville sometime this week? I am still working on the case, as you probably know, and am anxious to have some help from you, if you can give it to me. The question is one which I think only you can answer for me satisfactorily, and as I would like to keep it confidential, I hope you will come down alone. Unless I hear from you, I shall expect you on the 9th, by the 11 o'clock train. Please meet me at police headquarters." So, something is up. He's heard something and doesn't want to broadcast it. One wonders what this could be. And with that, let's get started. Chapter 8. Questions, No Answers. The 11 o'clock is a good train. It makes the run to Collegeville in under 2 hours. I sat in the smoking car, watched the miles pour past the window, and tried to figure out something that had happened the night before. After I'd got Parsons' letter, I'd asked my employers if I could have a leave of absence for the 9th. They gave it without any questions. Then the idea came to me that since I wouldn't have to work on the 9th, the evening of the 8th would be a good time for a party. So I asked Jerry and Selena and Grace if they wanted to go out on a binge. I owed Grace something in an indirect way, and I wanted to show Jerry that there were no hard feelings and be the first to celebrate his and Selena's setting a date for their marriage. All three of them liked the idea, and we arranged to meet at the apartment at 7. While dressing, Jerry and I had 1 or 2 cocktails just to make sure there was no poison in them. After a while, Grace came in, wearing a dull red dress with swirling skirts and gold sandals. She had her hair done a new way and looked entrancing. As soon as I saw her, I knew she'd firmly decided to look like nobody's mother. Competition with Selena may have been in her mind, too, and if it was, she'd struck just the right note to get away with it. They were so utterly different that no one would think of comparing them. I was suddenly delighted with her and glad to see her and felt very unfilial indeed. When I kissed her, I noticed that she had on a new perfume. "Well, darling," I said, "you're enough to start an Oedipus complex." She laughed and remarked, "Fred thinks you're mean not to have invited him." "This is his night for the club, isn't it?" "Yes, but tonight he didn't want to go especially." "I bet that was after he saw you in this outfit." She went over to the tray and picked up a cocktail, tossing me an impudent grin over her shoulder. "What an imagination you have!" I told her it didn't take any imagination, and we had a quick cocktail together. It was Jerry's week in the kitchen, and he was out there fixing a few hors d'oeuvres. What with my previous drinks and Grace looking so attractive and the conviction that in throwing this party I was doing something really nice for a change, I began to feel extremely good. "By the way," I asked her, "what's that perfume you're wearing? I like it." "Gracious, but you're gallant tonight, my pet. It's called Adieu Sagesse." "You ought to give a bottle to Selena." She stuck out the tip of her tongue and said meow at me, and we both laughed. That literally says meow. M-I-A-O-U-W, meow. Jerry came with a plate of stuff that he'd made to go with the cocktails and told Grace she looked stunning. We all had another drink. Then he told her that he and Selena were to be married the 12th of January. Grace shook her head at him in admiration. "As a child, Jeremiah, I remember you were the shyest little boy I ever knew. And here you are, positively bursting into matrimony. Are you going to marry her in the ordinary way, or come riding up on a big white horse and sweep her into your arms and dash off?" He blushed.
Grace, it's not so bad as that, surely."
"No," she said, "I know it. I'm really delighted, of course. Selena's the most beautiful person I've ever seen, and you're lucky. And so is she." He blushed again.
"Please, spare my blushes."
"You do it so nicely." He laughed and said,
"You're hopeless, Grace."
"Not entirely, my lamb, but pretty old to change. You must allow an old woman her peculiarities." Then her manner changed, and she stopped smiling. "I'm just foolish enough to rush in where angels would fear to tread, Jerry. Have you told your father?"
He nodded. "Yes, I called him up last night."
"And what did he say?" Jerry looked a little uncomfortable.
"He said he'd talk to us both about it when we got out there this weekend."
Grace laughed. "The famous Lister reticence extending to the telephone, I see. Well, as for that, don't worry. Just let Selena handle him." The doorbell rang, and she came in. A pleased smile came over Grace's face, and I suspected she was complimenting herself on Selena's dress. And well she might. It was a masterpiece. Silver green, the color of aspen leaves, and cut so simply and severely as to be very nearly ostentatious. Jerry's heart went into his eyes, and I could not blame him. After the greetings were over, I proposed a toast to the wedding, and the three of us drank it. Selena, as usual, drank nothing, and watched the rest of us with a faint smile as we clinked our glasses together. But it was all very gay.
gayer than any time I spent with Selena either before or afterward. She was wearing a ring. A square-cut emerald with a deep, burning green heart to it that was the sort of thing you see displayed in Tiffany's window all by itself. We exclaimed over it. "Goodness, darling," said Grace. "If any of my men had ever offered me an engagement ring like that, I'd have insisted on marrying him right then and there for fear he might escape me." Selena looked pleased. "Jerry must have been extravagant," she said. Yes, he told her, and gosh, how I loved it. But I stared at the emerald without being able to think of a word to say. It struck a note of finality that took some of the bloom off the evening for me. After one more cocktail apiece, we sallied forth to do the town. Walking toward the avenue and a taxi, Selena and I dropped a few steps behind Grace and Jerry. After a few yards, she turned to me and said, without preamble, "You are unhappy about Jerry and me." "No, I'm not." "Please, Bark, tell me the truth." "Well, then, I think you're rushing things a little." "You mean that we ought not to be married so soon?" "Exactly." "Jerry said some people might think that, but why do they?" I turned to look at her in the dusk of the street. Perhaps she was making fun of me, but apparently she was serious. Her lips were level and her eyes direct. "Well," I told her, "it's customary to wait a little longer." She was insistent. "Yes, I know that. But why?" I referred her to Hamlet, Act 1, but she did not know, or pretended she didn't, what I meant. In desperation, I explained that the popular view was that it took more than a month or two to forget a first husband and to turn to a second love. "Oh," she said, "I wondered. Sometimes it is hard to understand just what is behind your ideas." It was an extraordinary remark, and I did not know how to take it. Before I could ask her, she went on, "But I think that it is all right for Jerry and me to be married, even so soon. You see, I never loved LeNormand." This was getting beyond me. I told her that whatever she and Jerry did was their affair. "Yes," she said, "but I want you to understand it. You are Jerry's best friend." "And as such," I told her, "the only thing I want is to see him happy." Mercifully, a cab drew up at the curb beside us before this insane conversation could continue. I was angry at Selena for simply tramping into the middle of a complicated situation and talking bluntly about it. I resented the fact that she had put me through so thoroughly on the defensive, and concluded finally that the less I had to do with her direct interrogations, the better the evening would go for me. It was after a good dinner over which we sat until past 10 o'clock that the incredible part of the performance took place. The three of us, at least, had drunk enough not to want to end the evening there and then. It was too late for the theater, and we decided that the thing to do was to dance. After a lot of argument between Grace and me, we took a cab to Barney's. It's a small place, east, in the middle 50s, but the thing I liked about it was that the music was never too loud, and somewhere Barney had picked up the idea that people can be amused in other ways than by bawdy jokes and undressing girls. Not that I have any objection to either of those forms of entertainment, but some instinct in me rejected the notion of celebrating our particular occasion in other than the nicest way I could think of. And I counted on Barney to provide as much niceness as was consistent with having a good time. The music was really good. I had not danced with Selena before, and the moment I began, I knew it was going to be an experience. My expectation had been that we'd have a difficult time together on a dance floor. There was too much constraint between us, and an antagonism of character we both recognized. In addition, she was very tall, and yet she danced as no woman I have ever met. I forgot myself completely, and I could not think of her any longer as a woman. Instead, it seemed to me that my arm was around the moving shape of the music itself. The low, insistent beat of the rhythm was in every muscle of her body, and she was completely weightless. We moved round the floor like a part of the melody. I remember thinking that this was the first time dancing had ever seemed to me an art. The people sitting at tables on the edge of the floor followed us with their eyes. I am not an exceptional dancer, scarcely even average, yet when the music stopped there were scattering hand claps from the spectators, and I discovered that we had been left almost alone on the floor. It also occurred to me with surprise that we had not exchanged a word in the entire dance. I took her back to the table. Jerry and Grace were sitting there talking together. "Fella," I told him, "this girl of yours can dance." He was pleased. "It's an experience, isn't it?" Selena smiled and said, "This is easy music." I sat down at the table and picked up my highball. The way Selena had danced did not at the time seem to me to belong in her character. I thought of her awkward clothes when I had first seen her, of the stiffness and coldness of most of the things she said. The contrast with the fluid rhythm of her body in my arms a moment ago was puzzling. I told Grace about it later, when Jerry and Selena were on the floor. She watched them a while with her eyes partly closed, smiling to herself. "You never know," she said. After Grace and I had trod a couple of measures, it was midnight. Most of the lights went out, and Barney himself pattered out into the middle of the dance floor and held up his hand. He had a spotlight trained on the bald spot at the back of his head, and with his round, pink face, he looked like an Old Testament cherub. "Ladies, gentlemen, and visitors from out of town," he began, and went on to tell us that he had a special attraction to offer this evening. It turned out to be an Egyptian prestidigitator and magician, who, at least for business purposes, called himself Golly Golly. After some inevitable puns on the fellow's name, Barney announced that following his performance, Golly Golly would circulate among us and perform sleight of hand tricks at the tables. We were welcome to figure out how he did it if we could. Barney retired and was followed by a long roll on the orchestra drums and a flood of light from the spots. Into the middle of the noise and brightness leaped a little brown man with a wizened face. He wore a turban and a green and white striped robe with long, flowing sleeves. His first concern was to bow elaborately in all directions and look us over with a pair of large, melancholy black eyes. Then he exclaimed, "Golly, golly!" in a high, pleased voice, and began throwing colored balls into the air. There was an astonishing number of them, taken, I suppose, from his sleeves, and his juggling was beautiful to watch. He wove patterns and figures with the arcs of the balls in the air, and at the end made them disappear as surprisingly as he had produced them. There was a burst of applause, and he smiled delightedly at us. His own skill, in the acts which followed, seemed to delight him, and he was constantly saying, "Golly, golly!" with a sort of childlike enthusiasm. Selena was watching him without expression. Once or twice, at some particularly dexterous or mystifying bit of business, she smiled slightly, but that was all. After the first few tricks, she seemed bored and paid no further attention to him. Grace, on the other hand, was fascinated. She had her mouth open in an "oh" of surprise most of the time. When the lights came up, Jerry and I clapped loudly and shouted, "Encore!" The little man bowed to us several times and finally made his way directly to our table. On closer inspection, he was even older than he had looked under the spotlight, and I don't think there was much doubt that he was an Egyptian. I liked him at once. "Golly, golly, do card tricks," he said, producing a deck. "You like?" We told him we would, and he asked us to inspect the cards, which were in a sealed deck. We broke the paper and looked carefully at them, front and back. There were the conventional 52, and everything seemed to be in order, so we told him to go ahead. He made the cards appear and disappear in one way and another, but most of the tricks I had seen before. Perhaps he knew others even better, but we never got a chance to see them, because the most inexplicable of things Selena ever did in my presence intervened. It happened in the middle of one of his tricks. He had handed the deck to me and told me to shuffle it. I did so, thoroughly. Then he told me to pick out a card, in my mind, but not to separate it from the pack. Mentally, I selected the 4 of clubs. Still following instructions, I asked Grace to cut the pack, which she did, and handed the cards to Jerry. He spread them out in a fan across the tablecloth, back up. "Now," said Golly Golly to me, his black eyes smiling, "you know which card is yours?" I hadn't the faintest idea. "No." "You know?" he asked Grace. "My dear man," said Grace. "And you?" Selena was apparently startled by the question. "Certainly." "Certainly," she said, reached out one white hand, and turned over the 4 of clubs. For one instant, a look of incredulous surprise stamped itself on Golly Golly's face. My own jaw must have been sagging. Then the little Egyptian rallied himself. "That right?" he said to me. "It certainly is," I told him. He bowed very low, more to Selena, I thought, than to the rest of us, scooped up the cards, bowed again, and left the table. The 3 of us watched him go, and then turned with one accord upon Selena. She was looking distressed.
"Darling," said Jerry, "would you mind telling us how you did that?"
"Goodness, Selena," said Grace, "we ought to form a bridge partnership at once, my dear." She shook her head. "Listen," I said, "you can't just do a thing like that and leave us all in the dark. How is it done?" But she wouldn't tell. At first she refused to say anything about the trick, and then she insisted that it had been simply luck. At the time, I didn't wholly believe her, and sitting in the Collegeville train the next day, the thing seemed fantastic. Not once had she touched the cards, and I had told no one which card I had picked. I went over and over the scene at Barney's in my mind, and the answer eluded me. If it was luck, it was 1 chance in 52, and there had been nothing uncertain about the way she had turned that card over. More than anything else, her calm, almost disinterested manner had impressed me. She seemed to view it as a trick to amuse children. Familiar landscapes and towns began to flash past the window. I saw that we were only a few miles out of Collegeville, and my thoughts turned to Parsons and his reason for sending for me. Perhaps he had made some progress on the LeNormand business, though there was nothing in the papers to suggest it. In any case, it must be more or less unofficial, or his summons to me would have been of a different sort. On the whole, I decided, the indications were that he had discovered nothing definite. My anxiety about Jerry's marriage, my instinct that it was in some way wrong and undesirable, had preoccupied my mind. For a week I had hardly thought about the murder of LeNormand except casually. I was convinced that it was insoluble, and my memories of it were so appalling that I had walled it off in a corner of my mind and tried to forget about it. And yet it was a part of the fiber of every day I lived, and of most things I did. Only last night I had been sitting in a nightclub with LeNormand's widow, almost without realizing how short a time had elapsed since her husband's death. So much had happened in the intervening weeks that the night when we had found his burning body seemed a year instead of a month ago. Jerry, I reflected, had not put the thing out of his mind to the same extent that I had. Several times I had come home to find him at the desk, surrounded with crumpled sheets of paper, on which were marks that looked to me like the figures and symbols on LeNormand's observatory table. Once I had found in the wastebasket a floor plan of the observatory, apparently drawn from memory, and he had even used the university directory for some purpose, for I found it on the table one morning. I wondered why he was so eager to get to the bottom of the thing. The obvious suggestion was that because it concerned Selena, it was important to him. But I rejected that idea. Psychologically, I should have said the normal thing for him to do was to think as little of the past as possible, to seek to put as much distance, mentally, between it and his present as possible. The sight of Armitage Tower, coming up above the trees of the train heightened the feeling of tension that had been growing in me. Whatever was to happen in the next few hours, I was afraid of them. As the train pulled into the station and I started down the car steps, I was aware of a dryness in my mouth and an uncertainty in my knees that were symptoms of a nervousness that was first cousin to fear. Chapter 9. Interrogation. I took a taxi to the town hall and went up its steps with my heart hammering at my ribs. Parsons was in the police station room where he had talked to us before, sitting at the same long table. In front of him was a large black entry book of some sort and a pile of papers. He was chewing on the stub of a cigar and jotting down notes on a block of scratch paper with quick, decisive stabs of his pencil. There was an air of effectiveness about him. He looked up for a second as I came in, waved a hand in a gesture of welcome, and remarked, past the cigar, "Sit down. With you in a second." He was genuinely busy, all right. I thought for a moment that he was putting me off to let my nervousness and anxiety come to a head, but as I watched his broad, blunt fingers scrambling through the papers in front of him and the quick way he glanced from them to his notations on the pad, I realized that he was tremendously concentrated, perhaps even excited. He had something, or thought he did. I filled a pipe and lit it, trying hard to keep the match from trembling in my fingers, and leaned back in my chair. Finally, he straightened up, pulled a couple of fresh cigars from his pocket, thrust one of them toward me, and then, seeing my pipe, retracted it. After he had his own smoke going well, he blew 2 or 3 rings at the ceiling, shoved his chair back, put his feet on the table, and looked at me. "One thing, Mr. Jones," he said, "there's nothing to worry over. This is just a talk between the two of us. Nothing official about it." "I'm not worried," I told him. "Good." He was silent for a moment. "I suppose you and Mr. Lister have done a lot of thinking about this thing in the last few weeks." "Well," I said, "some, of course." "Tell me, have you got any new ideas since I saw you?" I was a little surprised at this question and wondered what he was trying to get at. "No," I told him, "at least I haven't." "You haven't," he repeated. "What about Mr. Lister?" "I don't think he has either." He was silent, so I added, "We don't talk about it very much." "I can understand that," he said, and he looked at me thoughtfully. "Mr. Jones," he said finally, "I'm going to be frank with you. This is just between us two." "I won't repeat a word of it." "All right." And then, with emphasis, he added, "Not even to Mr. Lister, or Mrs. LeNormand." I nodded. "The fact is, I haven't got to first base with this case. I don't know any more than I did 4 weeks ago, except that everybody's story seems to be straight. I can't find a single clue or a single fact to go on. I haven't even been able to find a single person who saw a stranger on the campus that night." He paused and smiled. And when the police begin looking for mysterious strangers, it's a sign the case is not going so well." His manner was certainly disarming. He had me on his side, whatever it was, already. "Now," he went on, "when I get stuck like this on what I'll call the physical side of a case, what you'd say were clues, I try to figure on the thing from another angle, and that's the characters of the people in it. Psychology, you'd call it, and motive." He looked at me pretty sharply, but though I'd likely have given away any thought I had, I didn't have one. My mind was a blank, so I suppose my face didn't help him much. "Motive," he continued, "is usually a pretty easy thing to spot. Money first, by a long shot, and then women. There are a couple of others, like hate and revenge, but you hardly ever run into them unless there's a maniac somewhere." I thought about that. "Well," I said, "none of those seems very useful in this case." He nodded. "Money? Certainly not. He had nothing besides his salary and the $5,000 life insurance policy, and apparently he had no professional jealousy to deal with in his work. So I figured out it must be that the motive revolved around some woman." I began to see where he was headed, and the palms of my hands started to sweat. "And the only woman," he went on inexorably, "is Mrs. LeNormand." I didn't say anything, so after a time he asked, "What do you think about her?" I took a moment to frame an answer to that one. It's hard to tell. She's not like anyone else. She's intelligent and quiet, and she knows her own mind. I floundered and stopped. Parsons took a long pull at his cigar. "Mr. Jones, you've used some funny words for a young man talking about a pretty woman. Intelligent, quiet, knows her own mind. I'd say you didn't like Mrs. LeNormand much, right?" "Yes," I admitted. He took his feet off the table and leaned forward earnestly. "What I want to ask you next is something that could be misunderstood. Before I say it, I want to tell you that I think you're okay. I mean, I like you, and maybe I understand a little something of the spot you're in. And you strike me as, well, as regular. So don't go thinking I mean what I don't mean." "All right," I said. "Go ahead and ask." "You don't like her, and you admit it. Are you sure you aren't jealous?" I got red and then laughed. "That's a hell of a way to put it," I said. I guess it might be fair to say this. Jerry and I grew up together. We've been a close corporation for 10 years or so. Now the corporation... I realized that I was saying too much and stopped suddenly. He paid no attention. "Now the corporation looks as though it might be dissolved, and by someone you don't like. That about it?" "Just about," I admitted. "Well," he said, "you've been honest with me, and don't think I wouldn't have known if you'd been lying." He tapped the pile of papers in front of him. "I've got a complete file here on what all three of you have been doing ever since you left town." He gave me a sharp glance. "I'm a policeman. I've got to know things like that. Don't get sore." "I'm not sore." But it did make me angry to realize that we'd been spied on all the weeks since LeNormand had died. "That's good," he said, and I could see he didn't believe my denial a bit. "Now then, the point is this. You aren't jealous of Mrs. LeNormand, but you don't like her. You resent her. Mr. Lister, on the other hand, is in love with her." I simply stared at him. The man was calm. The man was as calm, as unconcerned, as sure of himself as God Almighty. I began to get really angry. "What the hell business of yours is it?" I began. "Don't be silly, Mr. Jones. You know what business it is of mine. I'm paid by this state to find out who killed Professor LeNormand, and by God, I'm going to do it if I have to injure every single one of your delicate feelings." He was right, of course. I began to calm myself down a bit. "I'm sorry," I said. "It is true that Jerry is in love with her, and I suppose if you know what we've been doing, you couldn't help finding it out." Something I said must have amused him, for he grinned to himself an instant and went on. "What I'm after is why you don't like Mrs. LeNormand. That interests me a lot more, frankly, than why Mr. Lister is in love with her. I'm hoping that you can tell me why you don't like Mrs. LeNormand." "Well," I began, "I'm not sure that I can." I could, of course, have answered instantly, "I don't like Selena because I am afraid of her," but that wouldn't have made sense to him. It didn't even make sense to me. So I said, "I think, as near as I can put it, I don't trust her." My answer seemed to excite him. He studied me carefully a moment and said quietly, "You don't trust her. Can you tell me why? Or tell me at what times you don't trust her, or what she does that gives you the feeling of distrust?" That was the question I'd been asking myself for weeks. If I could explain to my own satisfaction what was the basis of my distrust of Selena, life would become a whole lot easier. The very fact that I did not know what it was about her that I hated, or feared, was at the bottom of much of my recent unhappiness. Perhaps Parsons' questions would clear up some of the confusion in my mind. "You've asked me a hard question," I told him. "I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I can't decide. It's no special time and no special thing. She asks the damnedest things sometimes. And if she has a sense of humor, it's not like other people's. She strikes me as cold-blooded." He was watching me intently and nodding his head at each statement. "I'll tell you what she's like," I went on. "She's like a foreigner, like some of the Germans over here during the war, I imagine. She doesn't want to let on that she isn't an American." This suddenly struck me as carrying coals to Newcastle. "You must have interviewed her. You know the quality I mean." "Yes," he said. "I know the quality, but I don't know how to describe it. I thought maybe you could help me." "That's as close as I can come to it." He was silent a moment, rolling the dead cigar in the corner of his mouth and looking out the window. "You said she was like a foreigner." I didn't add anything to that, so he went on. "Well, Mr. Jones, is she a foreigner?" The question took me by surprise. "I don't know. You must have the answer to that. Don't you always take down everything about a person in a case like this? Where they came from and how old they are and whether there was any insanity in the family and all the rest of it?" He continued to gaze out the window. Usually. Not this time." "You mean to say you didn't ask her all those things? Jerry and I practically had to list the fillings in our teeth." "Of course we asked her." He was frowning. "We asked her 12 times. All she could tell us was that she didn't have a family or any relatives in any place. She wouldn't even trust us with her maiden name." I made my tone as sarcastic as I could. "Oh, and naturally you wouldn't take advantage of her in her bereavement." "Listen," he said, and from his hard stare at me I saw my remark had not pleased him. "This case is dynamite. I can go so far and then the whole university will be down on my neck. What do you want me to do? Take her to the station house and try persuasion? The whole force would be out of a job in a week." "All right," I spoke out of turn. "You did. Anyway, forget it. Maybe you can tell us poor ignorant policemen what we want to know. Who is she, and where did she come from?" "I don't know." He sighed. "Then I'll have to ask you another question that's liable to make you mad. Can you find out?" "If she wouldn't tell you, she probably won't tell me." "That's not what I mean. You've admitted that Mr. Lister is in love with her. If anybody will know, he's the fella." "For God's sake," I asked him, "do you want me to play stool pigeon on my best friend?" He grunted. "Thought that was the way you'd take it. Use your head, Mr. Jones. I've got to have that information, and how I get it won't make any difference if she's not mixed up in this thing. If she is, do you want your friend going around with her?" "No," I admitted, "but all the same, I can't get it for you. I doubt if Jerry himself knows, as a matter of fact. At least, he's never said anything to me." "So he doesn't know either." Parsons' tone was not surprised. Well. "Surely," I suggested, "even if she wouldn't answer your questions, you could find out about it in other ways." "Surely." His voice was deceptively gentle. "I suppose your idea would be to work back from clues, eh? Labels on her lingerie and so forth." That is spelled Longeray, lingerie. That was more or less what I had been thinking. "Well," he said, "if it's any comfort to you, we did trace her clothes." "And what did you find?" He held up his thumb and forefinger in the traditional symbol of 0. "We're not as dumb as cops are supposed to be, Mr. Jones. We've traced a lot of things. Maybe later I'll have to tell you a little about that. Right now, I want to see if we can get at this thing from another angle." "If I can help you," I said humbly. "Right." His tone was brisker. "About this strangeness of Mrs. LeNormand's, this feeling you have that she's a foreigner, assuming for a minute that she isn't, would you say that she came from a definite social class?" "What have you been doing?" I asked him. "Reading Karl Marx?" Har. He smiled. "Well, I have read some of it at that. We got a lot of goddamn Reds in this country. Some of them right here at the university." He looked down at one of his notes. "I see here where a fella named Barclay M. Jones used to belong to the University Socialist Club. That was 2 years ago, of course. You outgrown it?" Some of it, I admitted. Takes time. He was relishing the point he had scored. But this isn't pitching any hay. What I'm getting at is, do you think Mrs. LeNormand came from a family that was, say, of the proletariat, or the bourgeois, or is she an out-and-out blood-sucking capitalist? I never thought about it. The question puzzled me, like everything else connected with Selena. Nothing about her seemed to fit into conventional pigeonholes. She has a good mind. My guess is that her family was probably professional. Her father might have been a lawyer, or a doctor, or maybe a professor. The minute I'd mentioned the professor idea, I felt sorry. Suppose it started him off on that whole business of LeNormand's row with his fellow scientists. Jerry would be dragged back into it, and there would be a whole hell of a mess. But Parsons was apparently talking about something else. And when I told you I was stumped on this case, Mr. Jones, I meant it. I don't know what the next step is. Everything we find out leads us up a blind alley, and the only light I can see... I guess I'll have to tell you all about that and then ask you some of the same questions over again. Maybe when you understand what's in the back of my mind, you'll be able to help me more. He was arranging papers and folders in front of him into precise piles. Then he lit another cigar and leaned across the table in my direction. There was uncertainty in his manner, as if he doubted the wisdom of telling me what was on his mind. And well he might. In the months afterward, when I had to live with his story and its implications, I wished 1,000 times that he had thought better of it, kept it to himself. And yet, even if he had never spoken, there would have been no difference in the outcome. Thwarted as he was by the case at every turn, he had no choice, I suppose. "Quite a while ago," he began, "I mentioned that we'd even gone so far as to look for some outsider, some mysterious stranger, as I put it, on the night of the crime. When we couldn't find one, I figured we'd better check back on a few other things. Local gossip naturally was one, but there wasn't any gossip about LeNormand and his wife, outside of a lot of old hens brooding around about her, who she was, and why he married her, and why she married him, and all like that. Now, in my experience, Mr. Jones, a murder is a thing that doesn't just happen out of a clear sky. By that, I mean, if you look close enough, you'll discover a whole lot of little things, straws in the wind, you might say, coming ahead of it. Usually you can uncover some of these things by keeping your ears open. But, like I said, there wasn't any real gossip. Nobody ever thought there was any bad blood between 'em. It's hard to believe, with a woman like her and a husband like he was, that there was never any trouble, but I couldn't even find a single old cat who claimed that Mrs. LeNormand had been playing around with another man. So the gossip angle petered out. Sometimes, too, in my experience, some of the things that come ahead of a murder go so far as to get into the police records." He opened the big black ledger in front of him. "So Cap Hanlon and I went through the blotter book for a long ways back. He sighed. "It seems to be fairly restful being a policeman in this town. We didn't find a possibility till we hit August. And then we came on something that probably doesn't mean a thing, except that it's an open case and it has a woman in it." For the life of me, I couldn't decide what this was leading up to, but I could see that we were coming to something that excited him. "Early in August," he looked at the book, "on the 7th, to be exact, there was a disappearance in this town, and the person that disappeared was a woman." He stopped speaking and began to fiddle with his pencil. There was something uncertain about him then, as though he were trying to decide a point that was vital to him without letting me in on the story. Finally, he jabbed the pencil at the scratch paper and said, "I'm going to tell you the whole story because it's the only way I can get the information I need. But I want you not to interrupt me, and I want you to give me your word of honor as a gentleman that what I have to say will go no further. You're not to speak a word of it to anyone. Okay?" I gave him my word of honor. Keeping it turned out to be the hardest job I ever tackled in my life. Parsons was looking grave and a little doubtful, but he went on finally. "About 8 o'clock in the evening, August 7th, like I said. A tourist named Jameson, Stuart Jameson, stopped up here by the Sunoco station to get some gas. He was driving an old Ford, a Model A. In the car with him was his wife and their daughter. It was their daughter that disappeared." He paused and licked down a flap of tobacco on his cigar. "I want to tell you about the daughter. Her name was Luella Jameson. The Jamesons live in a little town in South Carolina, and if you don't mind, I won't tell you the name of it. They've got a farm down there, and they're dirt poor. Cap says the car was a wreck on wheels, and when he talked to them, he noticed that their clothes were old and mended. But he says they seemed kind of a high type for all that. They were clean and nice-spoken. Both of them, he says, were tall and fairly good-looking, but it struck him that they were pretty old to have a daughter only 20. The man must have been about 70, and the woman, his wife, not much younger. That's about all I can tell you about them. I've got some pictures that I want to show you later. All except one thing. The daughter was an idiot." That hit me. I had not known what to think about Parsons' story except to wonder what connection it had with the LeNormands and with Jerry and me. I could see still less connection after he spoke these last 5 words, but something went through me almost instantly after I heard them. The only way to describe the feeling is to say it was like the click of a latch on a door closing behind you. But even as I felt it, I lost the reason for the feeling. For one fleeting second, things had made sense, and then it was all a jumble again. "The way it happened," Parsons continued, "was like this. Mrs. Jameson got out of the car and got her daughter out to go to the restroom. Mr. Jameson was checking the air pressure on the tires at the moment. You know how those filling station restrooms are. You get to them around a couple of angles of pretty close lattice work. The ladies' room at the Sunoco place is very small, just big enough for one person at a time. So Mrs. Jameson fixed up Luella first, and then she let her out and put her hands on one of the uprights of the latticework and told her to hold on to it. Then she went in herself, and when she came out, the girl was gone. There wasn't a trace of her, and nobody saw her go. It was just the end of dusk, and the girl had on a dark cloth coat. Mr. Jameson and Jack, the guy at the station, were stooped over, working on the tires, and Cap couldn't find anyone who saw the girl. I better tell you a little of what Cap and I found out about Luella. She'd been an idiot from birth. She was nearly 6 before they could teach her how to walk, and she never did learn how to dress herself or feed herself. And furthermore, she couldn't even speak. She used to make a few little noises sometimes, her mother said. Her mother told me. None of the doctors in their part of the world could do a thing for her, and naturally it was pretty tough on the Jamesons, she being the child of their old age and all, and an only child at that. They hadn't gotten married until Mrs. Jameson was way over 40, and they hadn't expected to have any children at all. When Luella came, they were tickled to death at first. Then, when they saw how it was, they decided it was God's will, and did everything they could for the kid. Being poor, it wasn't much, but they always kept her neat and clean, and never gave up hope that sometime they'd find a doctor who could do something for Luella. She wasn't so much of a burden on them as you might think. At least that's the impression I got after talking to them. She wasn't subject to any kind of violent fits or anything like that, and always did what they told her, if she understood it. Things like hanging on to that lattice post, I mean. They never used to worry about leaving her by herself at the farm. If they both had to be away for a while, they'd latch the door to her room and leave her sitting in her chair. Mealtimes, they would have her at the table, and Mrs. Jameson would feed her. Every way they could, they tried to bring her out, and there's no doubt about their both loving her. There's a big photograph of her in the living room of their house now. I'm telling you all this, so you'll get the picture of these people. I must say that I like 'em. Both good Anglo-Saxon stock from a way back. His people were English, and he's proud of them in a quiet sort of way. He told me his great-grandfather was a famous scientist, or mathematician, or some such thing. He had a couple of books the old boy wrote more than 100 years ago. Parsons smiled apologetically. They were so glad to have a visitor, they showed me everything in the house. Maybe I'm getting soft-headed, but I'm positive those two would never cook up a disappearance act even if they didn't love their kid, which I'll bet my last dollar they did. He looked out the window again. It It was pathetic the way he cried when she talked when she it was pathetic the way she cried when she talked about Luella. Well, came the New Deal. The Jamesons were cut in for a slice of the AAA money that was going round, and they decided to use it on Luella. They wrote a lot of famous doctors up north about her case. Most of them answered that it didn't sound as if there was anything that could be done, but one man wrote and said that if they could get her up to him, he'd make an examination and charge them just his minimum fee. Then, if he thought he could do anything, he would make some sort of arrangement about later payments. He was a good man, too. It was a good man, too, said Parsons. I looked into that. He picked up a folder from among his papers and glanced into it thoughtfully. There seemed to be half a dozen photographs in it. A sudden anxiety to look at them came over me. I reached out my hand. In a minute, he said. The rest of the story is short. The rest of the story is short so far as facts are concerned. The girl never turned up. It's pretty hard to see what could have become of her. Even if she'd fallen into the lake, her body would have come up. Cap and the boys dragged most of it anyway. I thought for a while she might have got picked up by some car, maybe, but there's no evidence of it, and that idea raises a whole lot of others. I won't go into all of them with you now, but I'm pretty well satisfied myself that that didn't happen. For one thing, the state troopers were having a driving license checkup a mile or two down the road, and they'd have been apt to notice anything as out of the way as a car with some guy in it who'd just got hold of a feeble-minded girl by mistake. Now I want you to look at the girl in this picture. He handed me what turned out to be an enlarged snapshot of the front of a farmhouse. There was a section of path in the foreground edged with white-painted stones. Then the house. A small, clapboarded one with a veranda across its whole front length. Even if the boards were obviously in need of paint and the whole place looked as pinched and poor as you could well imagine, it was neat and clean and not in bad repair. I didn't see any broken boards in the veranda, and the curtains at the windows were trimly and evenly looped. 2 people were sitting in rocking chairs on the front porch. One was a spare, almost gaunt woman in her 60s, with thin hair pulled up from her ears and piled in an old-fashioned coiffure on the top of her head. She wore a bleached-looking Mother Hubbard and old high-button shoes. There was a basket of what seemed to be sewing in her lap. The other figure took my eye at once. I was hardly aware of the rest of the picture at first. It was a girl. Luella, of course. She was sitting in a rocking chair next to her mother. But where Mrs. Jameson was clearly looking at the person who had held the camera, the girl's eyes were not focused on anything. She was simply staring into the distance. Her mouth was partly open, and her whole body was slumped into the chair. Her arms were lying out along the sides of the chair, and in one hand she held something which I could not make out at first. Then I saw it was a rag doll. It was dangling from her fingers. She wasn't paying the slightest attention to it. Even if no one had told me she was an idiot, I could have guessed it, after one glance. Everything about her was mindless, vacant, not human. I looked at her face a long time. It seemed to have regular features. The eyes were the same distance apart as Selena's. The hair was apparently darker, but the porch was in shadow. I pointed that out to Parsons. He merely observed that the color of hair was one of the least permanent things in the world. In this world. I pointed that out to Parsons. He merely observed that the color of hair was one of the least permanent things in this world. He showed me other pictures, several of them. Even one blurred enlargement of the face of Luella Jameson. I dislike remembering that enlargement even to this day. I looked at all of them for a long time. I remember my heart beat so sickeningly in my throat that I could scarcely breathe. Parsons finally broke the silence. "What do you think, leaving the hair color out of it for the moment?" "God," I told him, "I don't know. It's inconceivable that it could be Selena. In a general way, I suppose this girl does look something like her, but I can't tell what that face would be like with a mind behind it. Can you?" He seemed disappointed. "No, you're right about that. But in general, Mr. Jones, would you say that it was impossible for her to be Mrs. LeNormand? I can't say that it would be impossible, but her hair would probably have to be bleached, and I know damn well Mrs. LeNormand's hair isn't bleached, and she'd have to have more than the ordinary amount of intelligence before she'd even be close. Yes, he said, and then, after several seconds, yes, again. I don't get it, I said finally. There must be something more up your sleeve than this. What about fingerprints? He grinned at me. You might make a detective someday. I've got Mrs. LeNormand's, of course, but I haven't got Luella Jameson's, and I can't get them. Mrs. Jameson is too good a housekeeper. She washed Luella's room, cleaned all her things once a week. And when she went back home, broken-hearted, she got the room all ready again for the girl. There may be some of her prints down there, but none that could be identified positively. I couldn't find any at all, except ones made by Mr. and Mrs. Jameson. A girl like that, he added, touches mighty few things when you come to think about it. Listen, I said to him, I don't see your point at all. You seem to have gone down there and spent a lot of time on this Luella Jameson. From what you say, you must think she has some connection with Mrs. LeNormand, or even could be Mrs. LeNormand, and yet you know her. You know she is intelligent. You know how she speaks and handles herself. You even know, or ought to know, I added, thinking of his reports on our New York activities, that she dances. Oh, yes. He was quite calm. I know she dances, all right. She dances a month after her husband is murdered. He must have seen me wince. I don't blame Mr. Lister. He thinks he's got to get her mind off it, and he loves her anyway and wants to dance with her, so it's a good idea to take her dancing. He waved his hand again. A large chunk of cigar ash fell off onto the table. Damn, and I know she talks too. Not a trace of a southern accent either. But there are some things about the way she talks that puzzle me. It's what she doesn't say. I asked him what he meant by that. I seem to be giving you a lot of lectures this afternoon, he replied. Being a college man, maybe you're used to them. I tell you, Mr. Jones, even professors talk like human beings. What I mean is that when they're not dishing it out to their students, they talk in a way that tells you a lot about their past lives, if you listen close. Little words, expressions they use, gestures, too, and facial expressions. You know what I mean. Individual ways of saying things that have been built up... individual ways of saying things that have been built up over years of talking. It's like a style in writing, I guess, and it's never quite the same in any two people. Certainly I knew what he meant, and I knew that it was the absence of this quality in what Selena said, particularly when I first knew her, that bothered me. It was unnatural. I see what you mean, I told him. Mrs. LeNormand talks as if she was reading it out of a grammar book, he said. That had been Walter LeNormand's way, too, I suddenly remembered, and the thought gave me a twinge of uneasiness. LeNormand talked that way, too, generally, I told him. At least, he did when I spoke to him the few times we ever met, and he was precise about everything connected with words and figures. Uh-huh. He didn't seem specially interested. Neither of us had said anything for a minute or two. I was thinking hard, and Parsons' idea seemed completely fantastic when I got through considering it. How could this Luella Jameson have run away from her parents and turned herself into the sort of person Selena LeNormand was? I put this to Parsons after a while. I know, he said. It's almost impossible. If her insanity was due to a piece of bone pressing on the brain, and it got knocked back into place and made her normal again, sort of an unlikely thing, though, and I can't find a doctor that will admit the possibility. Naturally not, I said virtuously. The remark appeared to nettle him. He looked at me a moment then and said, All right, put this in your pipe and smoke it. Luella Jameson disappeared the evening of August 7th. On August 9th, at 10:30 in the morning, Joe Peters over at the county building in New Zion issued a marriage license to one Walter R. LeNormand of England and a certain Selena Smith. There was contemptuous suspicion in the way he said it. Selena Smith of Lafayette, Oklahoma, aged 21. And there isn't any Lafayette, Oklahoma. Chapter 10. Cras amet qui numquam amavit. You can see what sort of a case it is, Mr. Jones. Parsons' voice was harassed, and he chewed irritably at his cigar. There isn't a damn thing I can go to work on. Nothing but a half-baked idea, and every time I think of that, I wonder if I'm getting too old for this sort of work. He was right, of course. He knew practically everything I knew, except one thing. One thing that I hardly liked to admit even to myself. That Jerry was going to marry this woman, whoever she was, in little over a month. As soon as I thought about that, I realized something else, something that instantly destroyed my whole peace of mind. I knew this possibility about Selena, and I had promised Parsons not to tell anyone, not even Jerry, about it. It was frightening to know I'd have to live with the story of Luella Jameson and think about it every time I looked at Selena and never be entirely sure it wasn't true. Of course, Parsons was saying, I've tried to trace LeNormand's ever being seen with Mrs. LeNormand before August 7th, and no one that I can find ever saw her until the 9th. LeNormand didn't even leave town except once, and that was on the 10th. He took his car out of the garage about 7 and drove north along Route 72. I don't know where he went or what he did, and I can't find out. He got back to town in the evening. Did they get married in New Zion? I asked him. No. A man named Willits, a justice of the peace, married them. He lives on the Collegeville Turnpike about 5 miles this side of Zion. He paused to grunt and then went on. Sometimes I wonder how some of these birds learn enough to be justices of the peace. They've got to know how to read and write. That's about all this Willits does know, and he writes awful slow. But his story agrees with Joe's, over at the county building, in one respect. It was raining on the 9th, and both of them remember that Mrs. LeNormand was wearing an old trench coat that was too long in the sleeves for her. Joe said it was a man's coat. She didn't have a hat. And there was a trench coat in LeNormand's closet when we went through his things. What about their cook? I asked him. He grinned. Bessie. God, what a time I had with that woman. She talked more than all the rest of the people in this case put together. The trouble was, she was up in Hampton until the 15th, visiting her cousins. LeNormand gave her the first 2 weeks in the month for her annual vacation. When she got back, she says Mrs. LeNormand was already there, and she rambled on and on about how messy the house was. If that means anything. There was a long silence while he looked at me with a smile on his face and waited for me to say something. I looked back at him and tried to imagine some explanation for what he had told me. I couldn't find any. There seemed to be no proved connection between one set of facts and another. Mr. Parsons, I said finally, I never knew that detectives would talk so frankly. I wish I could, but I don't quite see how I can help you or what all this proves. Hell, he said without losing his smile, there aren't any secrets in this case, and you're doing all you can. I don't suspect anybody because I can prove that nobody I know of at the present time was anywhere near that observatory when LeNormand was killed. You two were the closest. I can't find a reason in the world why either of you should want to do a thing like that. I'm taking President Murray's word for it that neither of you knew about Mrs. LeNormand before that night. I didn't. We didn't, I assured him. His smile changed a little. Of course, if I could trace her and prove that you or young Lister knew her before she married LeNormand, well, I said, I can't prove we didn't, of course, but the psychological evidence, at least, is all against it. He nodded. Yes, I grant you that. Now, I want you to think carefully once again. Do you remember anything Mrs. LeNormand ever said that would give a clue to to her past, where she came from. No, I told him. I've begun to notice that she never talks about anything that happened before last month. He was disappointed. Hasn't she even mentioned any names, people, or places that she knows? None that I can recall. Well, be on the lookout for things like that, will you? And let me know if you come on anything. I didn't like that idea much. After all, I started to say, I can't very well get this straight, Parsons said, taking the cigar out of his mouth and looking at me with no smile at all. I don't suspect her personally for a moment. There's no evidence of any row between her and LeNormand. She was in the house when it happened, according to Bessie's own testimony, and nobody on the street saw her between the house and the observatory. No, she couldn't possibly have done it. But there's a mystery about her, and I can't clear it up. If I could, I'd damn well know who killed Professor LeNormand. And I want to point out to you, my friend, that if she turns out to have a past, and the kind of past that breeds a murder, the quicker Mr. Jeremiah Lister finds out about it, the better. If he doesn't, there's always the chance he'll find himself burned to death one of these days. That's one reason why I want your cooperation. Of course, he was right. I agreed to let him know anything I found out. He thanked me and stood up. I gathered that was my cue to leave, but I had one more question I had to ask him. Mr. Parsons, I said, you've told me a lot of things bearing on why Professor LeNormand was killed. Proving, he said quickly, that I can't figure out why he was killed, or who killed him. Yes, I said, but do you know how he was killed? He scowled. Yes and no. Half the faculty here has been working on that. The consensus of opinion is that he was burned to death. No kidding, I exclaimed. That the burns were not made by fire or by chemicals, but by some sort of rays. Rays? I said. Yes, he said. They tell me they can produce burns like that, only very small ones, down in the physics laboratory. I don't know. They aren't going to try it on me. None of them claims he could do it, but they all say maybe the fellows in their field someplace else are ahead of them. Germany, perhaps. They wouldn't know of it, of course, because it would be a military secret over there. For God's sake, I said, I pity you. Even an international angle. He shrugged. Like everything else in this case, there's no proof one way or another. Whatever the stuff was, it didn't leave anything to analyze or work with. I'm not smart enough in the scientific field to work down that angle. About all the good it does me is to tell me the sort of person the murderer is likely to be. Maybe, I shrugged. He's a mad inventor someplace in South Carolina who knew the Jamesons, and he shook me warmly by the hand. Goodbye, Mr. Jones. You were very kind to come down here. He was pushing me gently but firmly across the room. I'll keep in touch with you. Let me know if you find out anything. And for God's sake, by this time he'd backed me through the door, don't try to think up any theories like the mad inventor. I was halfway down the front steps, because you won't get anywhere with them. I thought of them all myself already. I shouted back a goodbye to him through the swinging doors and turned toward the station, chuckling. You couldn't help liking the man. Thinking back over the discussion, I realized he'd handled me skillfully. But he hadn't extracted the fact that Jerry and Selena were going to be married in a month. And as I thought of that, I felt a sense of despair. A shooting star plummeted down like a tear of light and vanished in the dark above the sound. Dr. Lister's face was set into lines that were strange to me. He looked cold and watchful, like a man waiting for the sun to rise on his execution day. His gaze was fixed on the yellow shape of the candle flame. Odd how much it looked like that Brancusi Grace had in her apartment. You see, I said, I am breaking my promise to Parsons. I am telling you something that he told to me in secrecy, but I think he would want me to speak now if he were here. His lips moved slowly. Yes, of course he would. I see what you have been living with. I'm sorry that there were those weeks when we did not understand each other. That doesn't matter. It matters to me, he said heavily. I was not as wise as I should have been. You didn't have any way of knowing. Let's not speak of it again. He nodded his head quietly, and after an instant said, Have you found out yet whether she is, Luella Jameson? The question seemed to echo at me from the night that held us suspended like two motes in a drop of dark water. I wet my lips with my tongue. Yes, I think I have. Life in New York for the next month was pure and unadulterated hell for Barclay Jones. I could not work. Fortunately, the holidays gave us a slack season, and I got by on that score. And I could not eat, and I scarcely slept. Most of the time I was more or less drunk, and doubtless I was thoroughly unattractive to those who loved me. Grace, after a bad evening at her apartment, in the course of which I cried maudlinly and stupidly about Jerry's approaching marriage, told me that I was disgusting and ought to see a doctor she knew. She had him call on me, and he turned out to be a psychoanalyst. Dr. Lister was more intelligent. After watching me put down 3 highballs in about 15 minutes, he told me that my enthusiasm was admirable, but I'd be having quite a hangover one of these days if I didn't taper off. He spoke of what happens to the insides of permanent alcoholics, and predicted he might be operating on me one of these days. Then he asked me if I was sleeping well, and I told him that I'd given up the process as a waste of time. He wrote me out a prescription, and in a lucid moment I had it filled. I got several nights of real sleep out of those powders, but then the prescription ran out, and I was ashamed to ask for another. Jerry did his best to keep things from getting too bad. He knew me so well that he understood it wasn't the fact of my not liking Selena, or the regret that we were breaking up our partnership, that was making me act as I was. But he couldn't understand why I didn't want to go out with the two of them once in a while, why I refused even to go to dinner at Grace's when Selena was going to be there. He didn't have a mental picture of the face of Luella Jameson, idiotically empty and sickeningly half-familiar, to tempt him into comparisons every time he saw Selena. He was patient with me, and kind, and put me to bed several times, and swore at me, and kept plenty of liquor in the house so I wouldn't go out and get boiled where he couldn't keep his eye on me. But there were times when his patience wore thin, and once he said, For Christ's sake, Buck, either tell me what's eating you and get it over with, or quit making a damned exhibition of yourself every night like this. But I didn't tell him, or anyone else. Liquor doesn't make me talkative, so I gave nothing away. I told Jerry that even if he didn't understand what the hell was wrong with me, not to worry about it. I promised to snap out of it sometime soon. God, he said, I hope so. I've never seen you like this. Live and learn. He bit his lip, and for an instant I wondered if we were going to have a fight. I should have welcomed it. Instead, he shook his head. Something's got into you. I don't know what it is, and I wish you'd tell me. We'd both be happier. Forget it. I'm all right. It's nothing to do with you anyway. You're not all right. And since you won't tell me, I have a good idea it's something about Selena. You're crazy. No, I'm not. Listen, you ape. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. Go ahead, tell me what it is. I promise not to get mad. I was tempted. It would be so easy to blurt out the whole story. In a way, he had a right to know it, in spite of my promise to Parsons. Jerry was the one who was marrying Selena, and if there was something wrong with her, something dreadful in her past, he was entitled to fair warning. It was on the tip of my tongue to begin telling him about Luella Jameson. But what good would I accomplish? He was in love with her. Nothing I could say would keep him from marrying her. To put that ugly story into his mind would simply poison some of his happiness without altering his course in the slightest. Jerry was not the man to change his mind once it was made up. So I held my tongue and merely said, You're making a mountain out of a molehill. The trouble with me is that I've been piling up hangovers, one on top of the other. You don't like Selena, Bach. That's a comma. You don't like Selena, Bach. I know it, and I can't help it. But you didn't like her before, and it didn't take you this way. You were swell the night we went to Barney's. What's happened recently that makes so much difference? Nothing. You and Selena haven't had a row, have you? God, no. I said. "Listen, quit worrying about me."
Damn it, she doesn't feel this way about you. She thinks you're swell. Did you know that?
I thought, oh, she thinks I'm swell, does she? Like hell. She knows what I think about her. If she can turn over the 4 of clubs out of 52 cards without batting an eye, she can damn well read my mind and learn what I think of her. All I said was, "That's nice." He turned on his heel and went out of the room.
Sometimes you make me sick.
I felt rottener than ever and went out to have a drink. It tasted sour on my tongue, but then so did everything in those weeks. I hated myself and ordered another drink while I reflected on what a louse I was and how much like Luella Jameson Selena looked sometimes. That was the day I went out and bought them a wedding present. I must have been no soberer than my average for the month, because what I got was a library edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica. At the time, there seemed to me something ironically humorous about that. Jerry and Selena, I thought to myself. 2 such fine minds can sit in front of the fire. He can read volume EXTR to GAMB, and she can have Jere Liebe, JERE to LIBE, and it will be a domestic evening. A lovely domestic evening. To those of you who are too young to know what encyclopedias were like, they were done up in volumes. Then I grew ashamed of myself and bought them a watercolor by Moran that I'd always wanted, and was so broke I had to borrow money from Grace. She made me promise not to use it on liquor. Jerry was finding this a trying period, too. His family were united in their opposition to his marriage and did little to make his life tolerable. They grumbled and pleaded with him in groups and severally. The worst of the lot was his uncle Horatio Delavan, a little dried-up gospel shouter of a man who walked in on us unannounced one night. Jerry met him at the door.
Hello, Uncle Horry.
Good evening, Jeremiah. I should like to have a word with you.
I could see that Jerry didn't expect it to be a matter of one word, but he swallowed something that was on the tip of his tongue and asked the old boy to sit down. I retired to the bedroom, but I didn't close the door.
Jeremiah,
said Uncle Horry's voice in the tone of a bank vice president calling up a small depositor to tell him he has overdrawn his account.
I won't beat about the bush, my boy. I want to talk to you about your, abrupt marriage to this woman.
My marriage to Mrs. LeNormand, Uncle Horry. Please remember her name. It'll help.
That is just a plane taking off.
Very good. This Mrs. LeNormand, your Aunt Mabel and I are very much distressed, my boy, very distressed indeed.
Jerry's voice was ominously calm.
I'm sorry about that, Uncle Horry. I don't believe there is anything to be distressed about.
Possibly not, but your Aunt Mabel and I feel strongly that you are not acting with proper circumspection.
He cleared his throat and inserted a note of unction into his voice.
After all, there is generally a good reason for most customs, and it is customary to allow more time to elapse between the, end of one marriage and the beginning of the next.
There is no good reason I can think of why we should not get married next month.
Convention, Jeremiah, and this murder case. You are both implicated, innocently, I'll grant, but people will talk.
Let them talk all they want. I don't give a damn.
Uncle Horatio sounded pained.
Tut, my boy, there is no occasion for strong language. Let us discuss this matter like gentlemen.
There is nothing to discuss. It seems to me wholly my own affair, Uncle. Dad and I understand each other, and that seems to be all that matters.
Of course, if your father...
Dad's having the wedding in the Long Island house. Is that evidence enough for you of his attitude?
Jerry was becoming quieter and lower-voiced with each answer, an invariable sign in him of mounting rage. He answered the next few questions, which had to do with Selena's religion, in a tone that ought to have warned his uncle. But sensitivity to the moods of others was never Uncle Horry's chief claim to fame. When he learned that Selena was not a communicant of any church, he began opening up the vials of wrath, quoting liberally from Old Testament sources. The gist of what he had to say was that any member of the family who married a heathen would need no blowtorches in his afterlife. How long he might have gone on, I don't know, but after one particularly I haven't seen this word in a minute. Perfervid sentence. But after one particularly perfervid sentence, Jerry stopped him.
Careful, Uncle Horry. Don't say anything you'll be sorry for later.
I heard his chair scrape across the floor as he rose. Nothing came out of Uncle Horry after that but a splutter. In a few seconds, Jerry said with cool impersonality,
"It is better to marry than to burn."
That was the end of this particular episode. Uncle Horry took an indignant leave. When the front door slammed shut, I came out of hiding. "Well," I told him, "apparently Uncle Horry is on the side of the angels anyway." He glared at me and then began to smile.
"He's harmless, of course, only he does get in under my skin."
"Listen, fella," I told him, "why don't you shut him and all the rest of them up? Postpone the marriage. A few months and they'll come round."
"You too?" he said. "Damn it, Bark, I don't get any peace from the lot of you. Even Grace. Last night she called me her impetuous young Lochinvar, and a lot more stuff. What do they think I'm going to do? Sit around and let Selena go on living alone in a hotel with no friends and nothing to do and be miserable? With that nightmare of his death to haunt her day and night? Even if she never did love him, it's a horrible thing to have to remember." He looked at me pleadingly. "Can't you see how it is? I don't even know how much money she has. Maybe right now she's worrying about not having enough. Damn it, Bark, I want to look after her. I love her and she loves me, and why the hell should we wait months and months just because it's customary?" He began pacing up and down. "Listen, Bark, I think you have the idea that this is all in my mind. Well, it isn't. I don't want to wait for her, but I would if she wanted me to." The implication of that took a second to reach me. "So she wants the wedding for next month?" "Yes," he said, "and I see why, too. I've told you. She's not the kind of person who makes friends with every Tom, Dick, and Harry. She hasn't any real friends except you and Grace, besides me." That, I considered, was putting down the best possible total for Selena's friends. Grace had introduced her, I knew, to some of her own crowd, but with Selena such a recent widow, and not speaking the same language that they did, I suspected that she had many lonely hours sitting in her hotel room, waiting for the evening and the time when she could be with Jerry. The thought awakened no sympathy in me, because she never impressed me as a person who needed friends. "Of course," I said cautiously, "it must be a rotten way of life, the one she has now, and I see that she couldn't have stayed in Collegeville." He looked at me directly and said, "When we got engaged, Bark, and I wouldn't tell another soul in the world this, she said, 'Marry me soon, Jerry. I need you.' So we decided on January. I told her it would be like this with most of the family, but she doesn't care, and neither do I." Yes, I admitted to myself, she did need him in some obscure way I could not understand. From the very first time they had met, there in LeNormand's house in Collegeville, I realized that she had been attracted to Jerry. And if that was so, and if she asked him to marry her soon, I had to admit that he was doing the right thing, although I felt it would have been decent of her to think about him as well as herself. "Hell," I said, "don't let them upset you. You're probably right. And if Dad approves, that's all that matters." "Yes," he said thoughtfully, "Dad doesn't mind." I said nothing, and he seemed to be thinking to himself for a minute. "Selena handled him marvelously. We went out there that weekend after the party, you know. Some way or other, she got round him that first night. Thought there'd be a row, but there wasn't. They went into the library and talked a while, after I told him our plan, and he just came out and gave me his blessing, so to speak."
He stirred in his chair, took out a cigarette, and lit it. In the glare of the match, his face was composed.
Yes,
He said, in the impartial tone of a man who neither defends nor praises himself.
I told Jerry to go ahead. I could not have prevented their marriage, and I wanted to have him feel that I was behind him in whatever course he chose for his life. Let me tell you what happened in the library.
So now we're having a flashback, flash forward, flashback. I'm doing my best to modulate my voice in a way so that you know when it's italicized present era text. So now the father is going to regale us with a story of his own. Well, Dr. Lister is.
We went in, he began, after dinner. I told her that I wanted to talk a little with her before anything was settled too finally. We sat down before the fire, and I tried to choose my words carefully. Aside from her beauty, I realized that I knew very little about her. So I began by telling her something about Jerry and what he meant to me. I mentioned the fact that I had to bring himself. I mentioned the fact that I had to bring him up myself, and that if there were faults in his character which she discovered later on, she must not think too harshly of me.
Of course he has his faults, Dr. Lister, she told me, but so does every human being. I do not mind that. I expect that.
That struck me as rather cool, and I felt that I hadn't created the atmosphere in which I wanted to talk to her. So I told her that she must understand that Jerry did not need my consent for anything he chose to do, but that I loved him and wanted to see him happy. I told her something, too, about our family, and that we are proud of it because we have held ourselves to a code of personal conduct that is not altogether the ordinary one. I explained that even though she felt she was marrying Jerry, it was not a case of Jerry alone. That we are, on the Lister side at least, a united family of which Jerry was a part. My expectation was that she would tell me something of herself, but she made no reply to me at all, so I asked her, finally, as tactfully as I could, if she would mind telling me who she was and where she came from.
He drew deeply on his cigarette and looked reflectively along the terrace. I felt that he was trying to make clearer something that was still puzzling to him.
She did not answer me at once. As I waited for her to speak, Buck, I had a feeling that I had said something that offended her, but I paid no attention to it because it seemed to me that I had asked nothing that was not proper for me to know. At last she sighed and said,
"You are entitled to ask me that question, Dr. Lister, but it is easier for you to ask it than for me to answer."
I had the feeling that she was putting me off. My next remark was some sort of apology, as if I had said anything to disturb her.
"No," she said, "it's not that. Perhaps, if I explain what I mean, you will understand why I cannot tell you more."
She gave me the definite feeling then that what she was going to tell me was all the information I would get out of her.
"Walter LeNormand once rescued me, Dr. Lister. He was a man that I think you would have liked. Your son liked him. I ought to tell you that I did not love him, but I liked him and admired him. He took me into his house. He married me, and when I was alone and in need of protection. He is dead now, and nobody knows how or for what reason. But when we were married, my past ended. It was a new life for me, a life that he gave me and made for me. There was nothing in my background that you need to think about or worry over. Jerry loves me for what I am, not what I have been. I want you to do the same thing. I want you to do the same thing. I shall be good to your son and try to make him a good wife."
Then she said nothing more for a while.
"In a way, Jerry, too, rescued me. After my husband's death, I did not know what to do. I was alone again, and in a world of unfriendly people. Jerry has changed all that for me without having to question me. Please think of me as Selena LeNormand, and no more than that. I want you to like me or not like me for what I am, not for what I have been."
She stopped and looked at me a long time.
I give you my assurance that there is nothing dishonorable, by your own standards, in my past, and that my people, too, are the equal of yours."
When she's finished speaking, Buck, I did not know what to say. I felt that she would tell me no more even if I questioned her further. As I repeated to you, all that she said constituted nothing more than a polite and devious way of telling me that she would not tell me anything about herself. But as she spoke to me in the library, I felt a great respect for her. There was character in her words and the way she said them. I debated the wisdom of trying her again. If there was a mystery in her past, I felt that I had to know of it. Yet it was essential to me not to maneuver myself into the position of opposing the marriage. You see that, don't you?"
"Yes," I answered. "I see how difficult it was for you." His story interested me, but I had known all along that he knew no more than I did. And yet, had he only realized it, he had had in that library the only opportunity any of us ever had to save Jerry's life. There was no blame in that. If he had known what the stakes were, he would have played his cards differently.
"It seemed wisest to me," he went on, "not to insist. I simply asked her if she felt there was any danger that her past, whatever it was, might sometime confront her and Jerry when it was too late. She leaned forward in her chair and replied,
"No, no, I promise you that will never happen."
We went on talking for a while about other things. I began to feel a great admiration for her as a person. She gave me the impression of tremendous inner strength, and I could not doubt her intelligence. Jerry, I felt, had chosen wisely. It would be an experience to live with a woman like Selena. I thought of their future together without fear. She was his equal, I believed, in the things that really matter. If I had to choose between an ordinary girl, no matter how much I might approve of her background, and this woman to whom I was talking, I should not have hesitated. Only once did I wonder if my judgment was wise. We had been talking about the future, and without meaning to pry into any understanding there might be between her and Jerry, I mentioned my pleasure at the thought that he was getting married and said something about my hope that they would have children.
"No,"
she said again, urgently.
"you must not expect that."
My face must have showed some surprise or disappointment, for she went on, after a moment,
"At least not for a while."
My first feeling was one of embarrassment. Evidently I had blundered into something. I told her that I did not want to make her unhappy, but that I hoped there was nothing to prevent their having a family when they got ready. She smiled at me, the warmest, most sympathetic smile I think she ever gave me.
"Oh, no," she said,
and there was a note of something like hope in her voice.
"I want to have children some day."
He was silent, and I knew that he could add no more to the problem that concerned us both. Time was passing, and I went on with my story immediately. Nothing he had said gave any further substance to the shape without shadow that was haunting my mind, and yet neither did what he had told me seem to conflict with the growing clearness of its outline. Don't lose your page. No! There it is. Jerry and I went out to the Long Island house several days before the wedding. Grace was there, too, and a couple of Jerry's aunts and uncles. Everything was very quiet, of course, and though all of us had our reservations, probably I was the only one who felt really serious about possible objections to Selena. She behaved, I must say, beautifully. The first evening she was there, Dr. Lister showed her all his prize books. The Sir Thomas Browne that he had found in a little shop in Tokyo and bought for a few yen because the Japanese proprietor thought it was only an English book, the special... Oh, there is a comma there that I just didn't read. She behaved, I must say, beautifully. The first evening she was there, Dr. Lister showed her all his prize books. The Sir Thomas Browne that he found in a little shop in Tokyo and bought for a few yen because the Japanese proprietor thought it was only an English book.
The special Melvilles he was so fond of, the association copy of Endymion, and his collection of Arabic treatises on mathematics. She spent about 10 minutes looking at one of those, I remember, although she confessed that she did not know a word of Arabic. Just the same, she gave it back to him with a smile and said it was interesting. He laughed and said she was the first woman who ever thought that about it, and she was welcome to come in and read it any time she liked. Of course, her beauty was like a candle in the house. Wherever she moved, she seemed to bring a light with her, and it was pathetic to watch Jerry follow her with his eyes. Yet I never saw them exchange any very passionate intimacies. Once, coming into the room we always called the extra room, a sort of little box that opened off the library and had originally been intended for a secretary's workroom, I found him sitting beside her on the old, battered sofa in there. He wasn't holding her at all, but was bent over her hand, kissing it. She was looking at his head with a clear, almost wondering gaze, and there was, I thought, a little smile on her lips like the ones children have when they are not quite sure of themselves. I excused myself hastily, of course, and went away, but I felt good about it. They made a swell couple, and perhaps she did have a heart. Later, I found her in the library, alone, looking at some of Dr. Lister's books again. She had on a heavy, dark cream knitted sweater and a dull green woolen skirt, and no ornaments at all except the big, square-cut emerald ring Jerry had given her. I asked her if I could come in. "Certainly, Bark," she said. One sec. My apologies, that happens more often than I'd like. Why don't you just put the phone somewhere else? Because I might have to take a call. It's important. Someone might have an emergency and I might have to fix it. My apologies. That's life. Disadvantages of recording these live. Where were we? Right. "Certainly, Bark," she said, and put down her book. I settled myself in the big chair that I liked, over by the hearth. Looking at her, meeting those extraordinary eyes of hers gazing steadily across at me, I felt suddenly sheepish. "Selena," I said. "Yes." "I just wanted to tell you that I am sorry for the things that have happened this last month. I haven't acted very decently, I'm afraid." "You mustn't feel that way." "I know, but I'm sorry about it. Listen, Jerry is a swell guy, see? The best is none too good. Treat him well." She kept on looking at me. "I want to," she said finally, and then, "What do you wish me to do?" I couldn't meet her eyes. "Oh, you know, give him a break." "No," she said, "I do not know. Am I not being the way I ought to be?" The conversation, I felt, was getting out of hand, and I began to feel silly. "Yes," I told her, "I suppose you are. Don't mind me. Maybe I have a hangover." Then I began to get stupidly intense. "If you don't know what I mean, it's a compliment to you, but all I want to say is, remember Jerry is the finest man you'll ever meet. There's only one way to be with him, and that's completely honest." It was on the end of my tongue to add, "And if you are Luella Jameson, for God's sake tell him so," but I did not risk that. She listened to me without moving and without changing her expression. Then she got up and crossed over to my chair. As she stood there, looking down at me, I began to feel sorry that I'd said as much as I had. Maybe it was the impersonal calm of her expression, but I felt again the touch of dread brushing the fringe of my consciousness, which she seemed capable of imparting to me. She put one hand on my shoulder as I sat there. "Bark," she said, "I am going to try to do what you want me to do, and I shall try as wisely and as hard as I can. Does that satisfy you?" "Yes," I told her. "You hope," she went on calmly, "that I shall make Jerry happy. You do not hope it a fraction as much as I do. But you must stop thinking about me as you have been doing.
I haven't been thinking about you in any special way.
You have been resenting me. I do not object to that because it is natural, I believe. But you distrust me. You must not do that. You must forget anything that may be in your mind about me. Jerry and I have more things in common than you think. We shall be all right if no one interferes with us. Without looking back once, she went out of the room. For a long time I sat there, staring out the bay window at snow swirling and eddying in the air outside. Maybe it was watching the storm that made me feel so cold. But I think it was my passive realization that whatever it was I did not like about Selena, and I still could not put a definite name to it, nothing in me was strong enough to resist her. There was a profound force of some sort in her. What she had actually said to me was not a snub, which I had richly deserved, but a warning, and so assured a one that it frightened me. Yet, looking back at the scene, listening to her repeat those words in my mind's ear, I realized that there was something else in them which I did not perceive at the time. After a time, I persuaded Thomas to bring me a drink, and went on sitting beside the fire. Grace came in, looking charming and full of enthusiasm. She disapproved of my attitude and occupation.
"What are you doing, my lamb, sitting here and moping and drinking?"
"Yes," I said.
"Cheer up," she said brightly. "Tomorrow's the great day. You'll feel better once it's over."
"Sure."
She settled herself in Selena's chair.
"You're still not reconciled, I see."
I got up and kissed her. "Come on, darling, give me a break. I'm a damn fool, I know, but I hate the fact as much as everybody else tells me they do."
She said soberly, "I think you're spoiling things a little for Jerry. It's your manners I criticize."
"And not my motives?"
"Get me a cigarette, will you, my angel? Thanks."
She projected a cloud of smoke large enough to conceal her expression.
"No, I think your motives are of the purest."
I felt a rush of gratitude toward her. There was one person who did not believe I was a complete fool then. "You take some of the weight off my mind. I was wondering if I was going nuts." She spread her hands in a gesture of humorous resignation.
"Selena is a beautiful woman, but—"
She said no more. "But what?" I asked her. She got up, came over, and pulled me out of my chair.
"But I still don't know how old she is."
She tucked her arm under mine, and we went away together. Grace had her moments, all right. The morning of the 12th it stopped snowing, and the sun came out. The decorators were busy in the house, so Jerry and Selena and I went sliding on the drive. There's a long run down the bluff, and past the house to the very edge of the Sound. A couple of the pitches are pretty steep. Jerry and I had been going down them for years, but I'd never got entirely accustomed to the drop just below the terrace, where the sled shoots out into the air and you feel yourself in a free fall the second before the crash as the runners hit the slope below. Our big sled just held the three of us, and I must say for Selena that she never turned a hair. Once when I turned and looked at her sitting behind me, there was a look of exultation on her face. After a while, we went inside, and Thomas brought us hot buttered rum in front of the fire. We sat there talking and laughing, and Jerry and Selena held hands. Then it was time for lunch, and then it was after lunch. In no time at all, we went upstairs to get dressed. The ceiling of my room was white with the reflected sun off the snow. I had a drink while I dressed. Happy is the bride the sun shines on, and God damn that collar button. Time to go downstairs and pin a smile on your face as you go out the door. Thank heaven it was not a large wedding. The fewer people present, the better. The music playing Lohengrin, because Jerry insisted that only the most conventional and sentimental of weddings would do for his girl after a first marriage presided over by a justice of the peace named Willets. Here comes the bride, walking by herself and looking so beautiful in Grace's dress I felt almost sick.
Silver-gray cloth like metal and soft as velvet, and a narrow fillet of flowers around her head. Lilies of the valley from the hothouse, probably. Her eyes, shining and cool, remote as the stars and with a light in them. Her face was still, and she looked more than ever like a statue come to life.
"Where is the groom?"
Jerry, in a cutaway, standing beside the hall table made into an altar, and looking white and thin-faced and dangerous, the way he used to look when he lined up on the field before the kickoff and tightened the chin strap under his helmet. The quick smile when he glanced at his bride... Sorry, I got tongue-tied there. The quick smile when he glanced at his bride while the minister was praying. The responses, firm and low, from both of them. "And if any person know just cause," I knew what might pass for a just cause, "or forever hold his peace." All right, forever hold my peace. Jerry kissing Selena, kissing his wife. Everybody kissing the bride. "Your lips are cold, Selena. Yes, such a lovely ceremony. I'll have another glass of champagne when you get to it, Thomas. Yes, doesn't time pass quickly? It doesn't seem like only yesterday that we were..." The two of them going upstairs to change. Plenty of time. The boat doesn't sail for hours. No, I don't think it's any secret. They're going to Bermuda. Thanks, Thomas. This is swell champagne. Here they come now. Whack him on the back as he goes out the door. "So long, fella." "So long, Bach. See you in 6 weeks." "Right." The sound of a loose strand on the chains, flailing away methodically under the left rear fender. Damn, I meant to fix that before they left. Champagne. No, Dad, I'm all right. This stuff is harmless. Talk. Champagne. Now what did I say? More champagne. And I suppose I should tell you, my dear lady, that my best friend just married a woman who was probably an idiot less than a year ago. How would you react to that, I wonder? "Just one more, Thomas. I can take care of myself." "Sure, going up right now. Just a little drunk, that's all. Hold still, Thomas, and we'll get into these jobs okay. God, what a night outside. Moon on the snow. Happy the groom the moon shines on. My God, that stuff makes the room go round. That's Orion, that big constellation. I remember. Damn all memories." Chapter 11. Events leading up to a telegram. I devoted the next couple of weeks to pulling myself together. It was high time. I'd been drinking so much that my hand trembled every time I picked up a glass, and several mornings I had to go to a barber shop rather than risk shaving myself. Work was beginning to pile up at the office, and somehow or other I got through it. Actually, I was glad to be busy because it kept me from thinking or feeling lonely, and I did so well in a couple of cases that they gave me a raise in salary. In some respects, life was very satisfactory. On the other side of the ledger was the fact that there was this time what amounted to an estrangement between Dr. Lister and me. The way I had behaved before and after the wedding, and I was very drunk indeed, Thomas informed me afterward that I said things that all present would remember for years, was unpardonable. Dr. Lister told me frankly that he was ashamed of me, and that he found it hard to forgive my conduct. The result was that I found myself more alone than ever before in my life, and for 10 days I could not get adjusted to it. Coming home each evening to an empty apartment with the prospect of long hours by myself had a depressing effect on my morale, and there was the constant struggle to stay away from the Scotch. Often I wondered if I had acquired some sort of obsession about Selena and her marrying Jerry. There seemed something unbalanced about the distrust of her that I felt whenever I thought about her. After all, there was little cause for my feeling except that LeNormand's death was an ugly thing, and it was out of that horror that she and Jerry had met, and not so ultimately married. The fate that had overtaken LeNormand, whatever its cause, was not a thing I could contemplate quietly as a possibility for Jerry, and there were too many unresolved mysteries about Selena and her first husband's death to please me. Maybe the Italians can live happily on the slopes of Vesuvius, but I am not that sort of person. While Jerry and Selena were still away on their wedding trip, I rented a 2-room apartment for myself farther uptown. For a time, at least, they planned to live in our old place, and I spent a good deal of time down there getting it ready for their return. I resolved that it would be in impeccable order when they got back to it, and believe me, it was. New paper on every closet shelf, everything put away in the proper place, wedding presents all unpacked and arranged, even the pictures hung up for them. I put my meringue over the fireplace, where it looked very well indeed. Uncle Horatio's lithograph of the Good Shepherd, a grisly sort of thing, hung in the foyer, where it would, if necessary, soften up bill collectors and help speed the parting guest. I must admit that there was an element of selfishness in all this. I wanted Selena, in particular, to be in my debt. It gave me a sensation of nobility to bury my personal feelings and think of her and Jerry's pleasure and comfort. The whole performance was a piece of self-dramatization, but they got the benefit of it, and it was harmless. So far, I haven't mentioned the letter I had from Jerry. It was as reserved and non-committal as all his letters, but I could read between the lines that he was happy. "The weather here has been warm and sunny almost all the time. You ought to see the moonlight nights we have." And more of the same. He mentioned Selena only once. "I know you are going to like her when you know her better. She says to send you her regards." Well, that was as might be. At any rate, it was rather a pointless letter except for a postscript. "P.S. Have you heard anything more from Parsons? I suppose he hasn't made any progress? There's not much American news in the paper down here." So far as I knew, he hadn't reached any solution. I hadn't seen him again myself, but Dr. Lister went down one day to New Zion. On the way home, he dropped in at my new apartment. One cold February evening it was, and we had a drink together. He told me where he had been. "Did Parsons have anything new to contribute?" I asked him. He shook his head. "No, I don't believe he knows any more now than when he started on the case." I wasn't so sure of that. Offhand, I could think of one discovery of his, Luella Jameson. Of course, that had nothing to do with the case. But the coincidences were curious. I decided to fish around. I wanted to find out whether Parsons had mentioned anything about Luella to Dr. Lister. "What is he working on now?" I asked. "That I don't know." He went on, a little embarrassedly, I thought. "When this engagement of Jerry's first came up, I wrote Parsons." "Oh," I said. "I didn't know that." "Of course I did. I had to make sure that the authorities didn't believe she was implicated." I nodded. "Parsons told me then that he could guess why I was writing to him. He assured me that so far they were fairly positive that Mrs. LeNormand was not implicated. He said that she had a perfect alibi personally, and there was no evidence to show that she was an accessory before the fact." He smiled grimly. He also remarked that there was no evidence that she was not. That was just official caution. "Yes," he agreed. "So I thought. But I went down to see him today to find out whether anything new had come up that concerned us. I'm pretty well satisfied that it hasn't." "Thank God for that." He put his fingertips together and stared at them. "I don't believe the police will solve the LeNormand business." "No," I agreed. "It's unfortunate in a way. I think we'd all be happier if it were cleared up." Personally, I wasn't so sure about that. It depended on what the truth was. "I guess so. I guess so," I replied. "You and Jerry haven't suppressed anything that might come out later?" He sounded apologetic as he asked the question. "We haven't suppressed anything." "Good. I think the wisest thing we can all do is forget the whole matter until the police have something more to report." "Absolutely." He talked on about small affairs for a while and then left. I felt unhappy. We had talked together like chance acquaintances. The Empress docked on a Wednesday afternoon, and I went down to see her come in and meet the two of them. Dr. Lister had planned to be there too, of course, but an emergency operation came up at the last minute and he could not make it. Jerry was looking magnificent, radiating a quiet happiness, and conspicuously proud of his beautiful wife. Selena did not seem much changed to me, and certainly she had lost none of her beauty. People, even in the irritating confusion of the customs, stopped to stare at her, and once a couple of schoolgirls sidled up to ask for her autograph. Apparently, they thought anyone as gorgeous as Selena must surely be in the movies. They were plainly disappointed when I told them she was just my friend's wife and nobody they'd ever heard of. Though, after I'd assured them of that, I wondered if it was strictly accurate. In fact, one of them did say, "We're sorry, mister, but my friend and me thought we'd seen her in the movies or the papers or someplace." In the taxi going uptown, Jerry presented me with a pipe he'd bought in Bermuda, and I was glad to have it. They made me sit between them, and were so cordial and generally sweet, particularly Jerry, that I had a suspicion they'd decided I was a problem child and would have to have special, careful treatment. But all in all, things passed on pleasantly, and I left them at the door of their place, feeling glad that I had arranged it so perfectly for them. All they had to do was walk in and begin living in it. I'd even started the milkman to coming again. The months that followed were good ones. Jerry must have told his family how decent I had been about the apartment. They began to look at me again as if I was human, and best of all, Dad and I returned to the old intimacy that meant so much to both of us. I went out to Long Island many times, and often when Jerry and Selena were not there. On such occasions, Dad and I did not discuss them. We had an unspoken agreement about that. I had hoped to grow to like Selena as I came to know her better, but it just didn't happen, though I learned to admire her in certain ways. She had a quiet self-control that made any open break impossible, and an almost unbelievable modesty about her beauty. And an almost unbelievable modesty about her beauty. A very rare quality in my experience. As time went on, I found it easier to be with her because I finally discarded Parsons' thought that she might be Luella Jameson. She knew too much, her mind was too clear and logical, she was too full of information about the most abstract subjects ever to have been an idiot. Watching her, I came to the conclusion that she had had a long and exceedingly thorough education. That alone could account for the way she could talk to Jerry and Dr. Lister about astronomy or mathematics or archaeology. It might, too, account for her almost gauche insensitivity to the prejudices and peculiarities of the people around her. Wherever she came from, she had been educated in an atmosphere of objective intellectuality, and her interests molded in ways unlike those of most other women. Then I would remember the way she danced, and not be so sure. When she was out at the house, she spent a lot of time in the library, reading every conceivable sort of book. Jerry and I would urge her to go driving with us, or play ping-pong in the basement, or occasionally, on a fair day, go out on the Sound in our sloop. She seldom came along, but when she did, she was equal to the occasion. I remember one blustery March morning when we were out on the water and she was taking her turn at the tiller. A cold, shouting wind was coming down the Sound, and the sloop keeled under it, till the cockpit combing was all but awash. Selena sat there with the wind blowing her hair and whipping color into her face, calmly watching the level of the water racing along the lee deck. At the instant when I'd decided that we'd be wet the next second, she eased off the helm and the wash retreated from the combing. She never batted an eye. That proved to me that she had courage and steady nerves. But I was glad to take my turn at the tiller. I like to play things with a margin of safety. That side of her was, if anything, admirable, but beyond admiring her, there was nothing else you could do with Selena. She had somehow never learned the little easy give and take that lubricates every agreeable human relationship. She could talk well on many subjects, but she never seemed able to converse, and it is conversation liberally sprinkled with badinage that I enjoy. When she spoke, she never made an allusion. She never reminisced, she never said anything silly. Every sentence was a statement or a question. She seldom laughed, but she did have a silent sense of humor of some sort. At intervals she would give a silent, almost secret smile that told me she was relishing something to herself. I find it hard to recall examples of the quality I am trying to suggest, but I remember one night when we had all been sitting in the library. After a time we fell to playing bridge in a desultory sort of way. Grace was out of the house that weekend, and Jerry and I had been playing against Selena and her. Incidentally, Selena was the most astonishing bridge player I ever met. She never seemed to lose an unnecessary trick, and though occasionally a finesse of hers would go wrong, I noticed that when it did, she... Oh, my head scanned up a line. She never seemed to lose an unnecessary trick, and though occasionally a finesse of hers would go wrong, I noticed that when it did, she always smiled in that little private way of hers. After an hour or two, we got bored and decided to stop. Grace, who had been keeping score, had no trouble adding up Jerry's and my side of the ledger, but the entries in the female column were staggering. Grace puckered up her forehead and wrestled with her pencil, muttering to herself, while Jerry and I laughed and told her we conceded the match. Suddenly, Selena leaned forward, picked the score pad out from under Grace's nose, glanced at it casually for a moment, and remarked, 17,860. Jerry took up the pad after her, while Grace simply sat looking astounded and relieved. After a minute or so, he said, "That's right," with a note of puzzled admiration in his voice. Jerry was exceptionally quick with figures himself, which was why he was such an asset to his firm of statisticians. I think he was piqued by Selena's speed. "You're quite a lightning calculator," he observed. She simply went on smiling lightly and impersonally. It was that summer, a few months after the bridge game, that Selena showed me a new side of her character, and one that I was to think of often later on. One day, in August if I remember rightly, Jerry was playing in the club tennis tournament. He'd put me out the day before, to my relief, and it was really too hot to do anything. I suggested to Selena, on some impulse or other, that we drive out to Montauk. She agreed readily enough, though I felt that the idea didn't especially appeal to her. For an hour or so we rode in silence. From time to time I glanced at her, sitting coolly and easily in the corner of the seat opposite me. She was immaculate in a dull blue, severely simple frock and a wide, plain straw hat with a white ribbon around it. Just looking at her made me feel cool and, in a way, rested. I felt that there was a truce between us, and resolved firmly to do nothing to violate it. After a while, without apparently speaking at me directly, she said, "I think Jerry is very happy." "Yes," I told her. "Why shouldn't he be?" It was meant to be gallant, of course, but she did not take it that way. "You didn't expect him to be happy after he was married to me." "Nonsense," I said, but I thought to myself that it was going to be hard to keep civil if she went on this way. She was an infuriatingly direct woman. "On the contrary," she said, "you are thinking that I am being annoying. I want to be... Oh, there is a period there, not a comma. "On the contrary," she said, "you are thinking that I am being annoying. I want merely to know whether you have any suggestions." "Suggestions?" I said blankly. "You remember how once, before Jerry and I were married, you told me to be good to him?" The recollection made me squirm a little, but I had to admit it. "So," she said, "I have tried. Do you think I have succeeded?" "Yes," I told her. She looked at me through those disturbing violet eyes of hers and said, "You know, I am not accustomed to people like you and Dr. Lister and Jerry. Perhaps sometimes I make mistakes with you." "Yes," I said, feeling that this was getting curiouser and curiouser. "From my point of view, you do. I think you ought to relax a little more." She sighed. "I don't quite know how to do that." Her tone of voice suggested that she would look into it in the near future and learn the technique of relaxing. Anyway, I said, let's not talk personalities. You're you and I'm me, and I guess that's about all there is to it. Yes, she said, and smiled that odd smile of hers. Tell me, I said after a pause, do you like this part of the world? She looked at me in surprise. Why do you ask me that? When I had asked the question, I had merely been making casual conversation, but her reply put a sudden scheme into my head. Oh, I was just wondering. Some people think California is God's gift to geography, and I have a cousin who thinks highly of the state of Maine. Everybody has his favorite part of the country. Long Island is a satisfactory place, don't you think? Yes, I admitted. The North Shore, anyway. I like parts of the South, too. The Carolinas and Georgia. Ever been down there? No, she said. I don't believe I should like it. The Southern girls that Jerry knows always seem to me unintelligent, and they have double names like Mary Lou and Sue Ellen. They seem silly to me. Well, there's something in that, I said, adding mentally that she could add a little Southern charm to her own character without loss, and feeling distinctly irritated that I hadn't trapped her into some sort of admission about her past life and where she came from. She looked at me and smiled. You're strange, Bark. You ask one question and really want to find out the answer to another one, don't you? I felt annoyed at her for calling the turn so exactly. How do you always know what I'm thinking? You give it away, she answered. How? I asked her. Why, she said and paused. I suppose you'd say that if a person went into a room and shouted something loudly, even if he was all alone in the room, he wouldn't be keeping what he was saying entirely to himself? Yes, but that's what you do with your mind, Bark. You mean you can read my mind? The idea terrified me and embarrassed me simultaneously. She smiled. Not the way you mean it, but everybody gets some thoughts from the people around them. You know that. Well, I began hesitantly. You all talk incompletely, she went on. Listen to what people say to each other sometime. The real conversation isn't wholly in the words. The words are clues to what the person speaking is trying to convey. The rest of it goes direct from one mind to another. You must have noticed that. This is odd, I thought to myself, but I suppose she is partly right. Aloud, I said, and I give out clues to what I don't say as well as to what I do? Of course. I decided to try her out. Suppose you tell me, then, I said, mentally deciding that her theory was ridiculous, what I'm thinking now. She laughed. Stop the car. I'll give you a demonstration. I pulled up along the edge of the road. Now, she said, you don't believe I'm right. Just sit back a moment and listen. I leaned back in the seat and waited. Selena was not smiling any more, but I did not feel that she was wholly serious either. I felt suddenly and uncomfortably that she was amusing herself at my expense. Gradually, I felt that she wanted me to do something. What, I did not know at first, and I looked at her puzzledly. She never smoked, of course, but I thought I might offer her a cigarette. The silence between us was getting uncomfortable. I pulled my case out of my pocket and extended it to her. Have a cigarette, I said. The tension between us snapped at once. Drive ahead, she said. You know I never smoke, Bark. Listen, I said. What the hell was all that about? She said composedly, I just asked you for a cigarette without speaking, and you offered me one. That was that. I thought about it as we drove along, but I didn't come to any conclusion. It's a good stunt, I said once. Yes, she said. I hope you don't pull that sort of thing on your poor defenseless husband. Oh, she said lightly, Jerry isn't a bit like you. And with that, I had to be content. We had a picnic lunch out by the lighthouse and watched the waves come in, and it was all very agreeable except for a few minutes in which Selena undertook to explain to me the theory of neap and flood tides, all in response to some idle remark of mine about how far above the water the high tide mark seemed to be that day. I was too sleepy and full of sandwiches and iced beer to care much, but it annoyed me mildly that she should know everything like that. A certain amount of ingenuous ignorance, I decided, was a great factor in feminine charm. I don't know about all that. Riding home that afternoon, I thought to myself that I had never before spent a day alone with a person and learned so little about them. Inevitably, it is an irritating thing to have a person, man or woman, refuse to let you see a single inch into his or her character. My stock of small talk had run out, and I was simply driving along the turnpike, watching the road and the other cars and thinking of little, when a curious thing happened. Selena reached forward suddenly and ratcheted up the emergency. Instantly the car began to skid, the tires screamed on the asphalt, and I had a devil of a time keeping us from turning turtle. In the middle of my struggle with the wheel, a bright yellow roadster full of prep school kids shot out of a narrow drive in front of us and swerved roaring off down the highway. They must have missed our front bumper by inches. I unlocked the emergency and we rolled on. Sweat was running off me in rivulets. It was the closest call I ever had in my life. Undoubtedly, Selena's quick yank on the brake had saved us from an ugly smash. As I thought of it, I realized that the road down which the yellow car had come was entirely hidden from the highway by a stone wall and a belt of trees. There was no way I could have known that that car was coming. "God," I said to Selena, who was sitting perfectly quietly beside me. "Thanks. That was too close. I can still hear the angels singing." She nodded quietly. "There was no way you could see that road." "No," I agreed. "Damn kids like that. Their parents oughtn't to give 'em cars." She was silent, and a belated question came into my mind. "How did you know they were coming?" What is it Jerry says? I had a hunch." And she smiled. "Well," I told her, "keep on having 'em." But it seemed to me that she acted with amazing speed and directness for a woman with nothing but a hunch. I ought to have felt grateful to her, and in a way I did. In another, the incident had in it one of the seeds of the irritation and uneasiness that Selena always seemed able to evoke in me. How had she known that car was coming? I went back a day or so later and looked at the place. There was absolutely no way of seeing past the wall and the tires. And the trees, sorry. I went back a day or so later and looked at the place. There was absolutely no way of seeing past the wall and the trees. The only explanation was a sort of clairvoyance. Hunches as good as that one of hers simply couldn't be due to chance. The months that followed flowed into one another without anything of importance to this story. I was getting on well in my work and devoting more and more time to it in consequence. I saw less of Jerry and Selena that winter than I had expected to, and I could see, when we did meet, that Jerry was delighted with my progress and puzzled by it. He himself was not deeply interested in the statistical work he was doing, though I understand he did it brilliantly. On several occasions he told me that most of it bored him. He admitted he put in a little time at his office... He admitted he put in as little time at his office as he could, and I wondered if he was growing lazy, which would have been unlike him, or just what he was doing that occupied, or just what it... Okay, we're going to take that from the top, because my brain is getting lost in the sauce. Let's try this again. He himself was not deeply interested in the statistical work he was doing, though I understand he did it brilliantly. On several occasions he told me that most of it bored him. He admitted he put in as little time at his office as he could, and I wondered if he was growing lazy, which would have been unlike him, or just what he was doing that occupied the rest of his time. One evening, I found out. He and Selena and Dad and Grace were to come around to my apartment for a buffet supper on a Sunday night. I like to give a sort of informal meal once or twice a month that way, and ask just the people I was really fond of. I suppose partly because I was making some money and wanted to spend it on entertaining the people who'd done so much for me, especially Dad. Sunday was the best night for my schedule, and Grace was glad to come because Fred was playing in a golf tournament somewhere in Florida. This particular time, Jerry and Selena came early. The cocktails were not even ready, and I was in my shirt sleeves, but Jerry was so plainly excited and enthusiastic over something that details like that didn't matter. He had something under his arm, and as soon as the greetings were over, he presented it to me with a flourish. "Here, Bark, with the compliments of the author." And he grinned. It was a thin, gray-covered little magazine with a 3-deck title, some sort of journal of mathematics. I ran my eye down the table of contents, and sure enough, there was the name of Jeremiah Lister. "I'll be damned," I said, turning over the leaves to his article. "What hath God wrought?" "You may well say that," he told me exultantly. "That obscure and droopy-looking publication is more exclusive than the Racket Club. And I have crashed its austere gates." "Well," I said, sparring for time and looking at the article, "this is a surprise, and my novel only half done. You've beaten me to publication, all right." Jerry's piece occupied only 2 pages, and it might as well have been a Sanskrit inscription for all the sense I could make out of it. There was a short editorial foreword by the brain that conducted the magazine, in which Jerry's work was spoken of as brilliant, original, and highly suggestive. After looking helplessly at the text for a few seconds, I said, "I bet Selena helped you with this." "No," she said, apparently taking my jest seriously. "I didn't help him." "I should say not," he added. "She was opposed to the thing from the start. She told me it was a waste of time, but even in the face of discouragement, I persevered. I like doing stuff in that field." As that immortal opus we had in school, Fraser and Square's French grammar would say, "Chacun a son goût." I was really pleased about the article. Jerry was a bright lad, all right. "What does that mean?" asked Selena. "Every man to his own brand of folly," I told her. She looked surprised. "But this isn't foolish. Jerry's article is absolutely correct." I was being flippant. The real translation is, "Every man to his own taste." "Oh." Jerry said, "Don't try to read the thing, Bark. Just put it away on your shelf of first editions. It'll be a collector's item someday." "Nuts," I told him. "I'm intellectual as hell. Everybody knows that. I'm going to leave this lying around on the living room table to impress people." He laughed. "It'll be all over rings from highball glasses in a week, then." I took it across to the bookcase. "In that case, I'll put it beside the Gertrude Stein book Grace gave me for Christmas. The 2 of them will serve to remind me that there are plenty of things I'll never be able to understand." Have I mentioned that this is done with a certain bent and view towards women and, I guess, intellectuals, and was written in, like, the 30s? Certain parts of this have not aged well. I will admit it. Selena followed me. "Who is Gertrude Stein?" she asked me, with interest. "A woman mathematician?" "Not exactly," I informed her. "Here, take a look." And I handed her the volume. She opened it and looked at the first few pages. "Are there people who understand this?" she asked me. "Well, there are people who say they do." She went over to the sofa and sat down with the book. I hung up their coats and began mixing a cocktail. In a few minutes, Selena got up and put the Gertrude Stein back on the shelf. "It doesn't mean anything," she said. "You ought not to put Jerry's article next to it." "I'm just teasing him," I told her. "Don't pay any attention to him, darling," said Jerry, lolling back in my best chair. "He's just trying to keep me from getting a swelled head." I poured the cocktails. They were good. Grace came in, and we had another round. I showed her Jerry's piece. She wrinkled her forehead over it for a minute. Goodness, Jeremiah, my sweet, I don't see how you have time for such things with a wife who looks like Selena. Jerry blushed and laughed. What I haven't got time for, he said, is my job at Howard and Neurath, statisticians. I'm quitting the end of next week. You are? I was surprised, though I knew he was not tremendously keen about working in an office. Yes, he said, I've about decided that what I really want to do is teach. It seemed right to me, and I told him so. First, though, I've got to get a Ph.D. That means writing a thesis. Swell, I told him. I can think of nothing more repulsive than writing a thesis, but you're the type to enjoy it. Thanks. It'll be a year's work anyway. Selena and I are thinking of going to that place of Dad's out west. I remembered then that the Listers owned some sort of house in Arizona or New Mexico that neither Dad nor Jerry, I think, had ever been to. An artist or somebody left it to them, but they'd never made any use of it. Isn't it way the hell and gone in the desert? I asked him. Yes, but it'll be quiet and give me a good chance to work. We won't be lonely. He looked fondly at Selena. Grace turned to Selena. Are you going to let this entirely mad young man make a female anchorite out of you, Selena? I won't tolerate it for a moment. I wouldn't tolerate it for a moment. I wouldn't tolerate it for a moment. Much better. She doesn't mind, said Jerry. No, Selena admitted. I don't see any reason why we should not go. Only I wish Jerry didn't have to write this thesis he has in mind. She turned to me. Can't he teach without writing anything? Well, I told her, you can't get a job these days in any good college without a Ph.D., and that means a thesis. And that means a thesis, as Jerry says. I see, she said, and her voice sounded thin and curiously disappointed. I did not understand why, but she was an incomprehensible woman. I did not understand why, but she was an incomprehensible woman. They left within a few weeks, and we all went down to see them off. When the train had pulled out into the cavernous gloom of the Grand Central Cave and left us standing on the platform, I felt an obscure feeling of sadness and foreboding. Jerry and I had been growing apart, of course, as our lives diverged, but this time, as we separated, it felt like the end of something. We wrote, of course, from time to time. Jerry's letters were postmarked Los Palos, and at first they came about once a week. Gradually they grew more infrequent, and so did mine. I gathered that he and Selena were enjoying their lonely life out there, but in the last one or two of his scrawls there was an unfamiliar note that I could not quite analyze. Selena seems to like the country out here, he wrote me in June, and it certainly is big and impressive after you get over the bareness. I'm working hard and making real progress. The only trouble is that there are so many things I'd like to be working on at once. My study window looks right out over the 50 miles of desert. It would be as easy as hell to get lost out there, and nobody would ever find you. Selena walks a lot, and sometimes I get worried for fear she won't get back before dark, but I guess she can take care of herself. You'd get a kick out of this place, Bach. Why don't you come out here sometime later? I wrote him and said that I'd like to come sometime, but that I was hellish busy and doubted if I'd find much time even for a week's vacation. His letter left an uncomfortable impression in my mind, though. I felt that he wanted me to come and was too proud to ask me. Then, when I thought it over, I realized that he was just lonely, and I stopped worrying about him. A month later, my doorbell rang at 9 o'clock in the evening. It was a Western Union messenger. The telegram said, Can you come at once? Meeting limited Tuesday morning, Los Palos. Hope to see you. Jerry. I cursed, got leave of absence from my office, and caught the Century the next day. Dad came down to the train with me. You'll let me know at once, he said, if it's anything serious. Sure, I told him. Both of us were wondering why Jerry had wired only to me and what had happened, but there was no certainty of reaching him in time with a telegram from us. They had no telephone at Cloud Mesa, and Dr. Lister thought it was too far from Los Palos for Jerry to come in every day. As the train pulled out, I saw his anxious face watching me through the glass of the Pullman window. I gave him a grin that I hoped was reassuring and settled back into my seat. Something told me that what was ahead was all of a piece with the strangeness of the last year and a half. The switch points clattered under the wheels, and the train began to rush northward through the tunnel under Park Avenue. And that is where we will call it for this one, this week, this day.
As I shuffle my microphone around, my apologies. Yeah, so things are developing. Things are getting strange and spooky and odd. And they are still pretty sexist. It's not as bad as it could be. I've read some stuff from that time period that's like, you kind of cringe. With this, it's more, it elicits more of a wince. Other than the whole premise being kind of this really strange woman coming into people's lives with really weird circumstances surrounding her. So things are moving along. Let's see. This Friday we should still... Yeah, this Friday will be fine. We'll be reading more of The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. The next several weeks are going to be very interesting for me schedule-wise. In that I'm not necessarily going to know interesting developments are happening. Some of them quite promising and good. Some of them very stressful. Most of them very stressful. But we'll see. I'm not necessarily going to know until pretty late in the game if nothing is going to if I'm not going to be able to stream. And I apologize in advance. I'll try and make it clear as soon as I can know. So yeah, this next month is going to be pretty weird. There's going to be at least 1 week where I'm not going to be able to stream, but I don't know which one it's going to be yet. I need to hear back from some people. Anyway, I'm being cagey about it because I don't want to make promises I can't keep. And I just want to warn people ahead of time. Anyway, I'll tell people on the Discord that if it's not going to happen, so if you're already there, you'll find out. If you're not already there, you can join and find out that way. If you don't want to join the Discord, don't worry about it. Or if you want to join the Discord just to acquire Echopraxia or anything else I wind up uploading there due to a copyright strike, for instance, as was the case with Echopraxia. If you want to just hop on there, download it, and leave, that's totally fine. I do not begrudge you this. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Discord as a platform. It has issues. Someday I'd love to read the book Enshittification by Cory Doctorow aloud on here. I am not doing it at this time. I very much wanted to. That was in fact going to be the Wednesday's book. Until I finished reading through it. But Corey went through all the effort to do his own audiobook recording of it on more independent platforms, not Audible. That it would not be cricket of me to do that at this time. I'll wait a couple months and see how I feel. Otherwise, I highly recommend you check out that book. I'm going to shill a book. I don't shill things too often, but I'm gonna say it's well worth your time if you want to understand why platforms are the way they are and why the internet has kind of gotten just a lot worse in what seems like a relatively short period of time. But it's a thing that's been coming for a while. But this does a pretty good job of explaining why it's gotten this way, how it's gotten this way, and then what we can do about it. I'm still waiting to get to the part of the book where there's something concrete on what we can do about it, but that's later. I haven't finished it yet. My time has not been my own. Anyway, on those mysterious notes and one desperate shilling of a great book, I'm going to leave you all to it. If the schedule remains as normal, we will probably be finishing this one up next week. How long is this last segment? I don't think I'll have to break it in half. Jeez. That's not too bad. Yeah, it'll be about as long as this one, maybe a little longer than this one. This one went a little longer than I usually do. I tend to target around 2 hours because, honestly, A, it's exhausting for me, and B, I don't think people want to listen to an installment that's greater than a certain amount of time. Like, I'm not going to do an entire book in one go for like 5-10 hours. Because I physically won't be able to do it. I'll be falling apart by the end of that, and that won't do anyone any good. But I figure around 2 hours is a reasonable spot for, okay, you can at least remember where in the file, if you've downloaded it for, or are watching it or listening to it, as the case may be, you can at least know where you are if you have to take a break. And it divvies it up into nice segments so you can move it around on a playlist should you wish to do that. I promise I put some thought into these things, not much. A little. It's a hobby more than anything. It's a fun one. I enjoy it, and that's why I keep doing it. Yeah, that's it. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Right now, the weather's actually pretty nice. It's a tad brisk where I'm at, but I like it brisk. Keeps me on edge. Keeps me with an edge. Makes me edge-y. Well, Plunderlings, I'm glad you're enjoying it. I forget when it... Jeez, that is a loud Jake-breaking truck. I forget where exactly I learned about William Sloane and this duology. I call it a duology. It's not. They're not actually connected in any way, but these two books, two stories. I forget where I first heard about them. Somebody recommended them to me. I don't remember if it was here or not. Where was it? I don't remember where it was, but I'm glad to them for it. I think it was something like someone asking on, maybe it was a Reddit thread, I don't know, or somewhere else. You know, what like autumnal or Halloween spooky books do you recommend? And somebody brought this one up, and I was like, oh, I've never heard of this. And I said, and then I checked it out and was like, oh, this is really good. I was hooked pretty quickly, and I'm glad other people are enjoying it. A relatively unknown author, sadly, in terms of authorial work, small library, but he was an editor for some short story collections, as well as I think he was a name in a publishing house. He had some throw, but unfortunately didn't have many books that he'd written, which is sad. You can read ahead if you want, but yeah, I'm glad you found it. I was very pleased to see when I was looking for covers of this that there were so many of them. I'm hoping there are a similar... So it's been republished a number of times. I'm hoping there's a similar number for the second book in the collection. The collection I'm reading from is entitled The Rim of Morning, Two Tales of Cosmic Horror by William Sloane. And it's been collected as The Rim of Morning, I think, back in the 60s as well. So there might be a 60s edition of it. Let me double check. There was a list here. Yeah, I think it was the 60s. This isn't telling me, though. Oh no, here we go. To Walk the Night and The Edge of Running Water were published together as The Rim of Morning in 1964. So it's been republished a bunch of times, so it should be findable. I'm hoping it should be findable. I'm losing my lips. So I'm glad you were able to find it. And the second book in here, which I literally just read but can't remember the name of, The Edge of Running Water. I think that's the edition I've got, the same one. It's a soft cover, sort of looks like there's an eclipse happening on the cover. Let me pull up the cover art here. I think I've got it here somewhere. this one? No, it's not that one. I think it's this one. Yeah. Looks something like that. Yeah, that has both of them in there. For my money, I feel like the second story, what is it, The Sound of Running Water? The Edge of Running Water, sorry. My brain has a block against remembering that title. Might be the stronger of the two stories, but they are both quite good. I was very happy at how good they were. I think they stand up, despite their anachronisms, I feel they hold up pretty well. Particularly just the writing style, like that bit that we had today, actually, where it's kind of like the wedding, where it starts off with, here comes the bride and all that. I think is brilliant. Like, that's some pretty. I don't know how many other authors were writing like that back in the 1930s. 30s? Yes, it was 37, right? My brain is scattered at the moment. Yeah, 37. So it's kind of this. It's very choppy, deliberately written to be very choppy, like it's a blur. So I can't remember too many books from that period that even come close to doing things like that. You can make an argument. Well, no, Hemingway really doesn't do that at all, at all. So it's not, surely not entirely unique, but I haven't encountered too many authors, particularly in this oeuvre, that wrote like that. So I found it very interesting. There's some other cool stuff that we'll get to. Also, just some decent ideas for a book, for books for both of them. They're just pretty cool. I can't tell you anything about the second one yet. Because I don't want to spoil it. And I'm not going to tell you what's going on in this one, because it's all about the mounting suspense, what's going on. They're both really about mounting suspense. He nails that. He gets the pacing dead on for that. It's this very slow, steady ratcheting up. They're very good. Kind of a slow burn, but it's very steady. Anyway, that's it. That's it from me. That's enough yapping on my part. Glad people are enjoying it. Hopefully next week will be business as usual, but if it is not, then it will be the week after. That I am probably going to be. I'm going to have to be out and about for most of the week. I won't know again until later, so we will figure it out, and I will make note of it as and where I must. Anyway, until next time. Toodle-oo.